program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking who attacked our country.
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam. And I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people that have so much to gain and have such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions, yeah.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 244. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today we are finishing up the third and final chapter of our Molly Maguire saga.
Yeah.
We've had a couple weeks since the last one. And
yes.
In fact, I had the kind of random opportunity to do a little on-the-ground reporting, or at least observation, in between the second and third parts of this, because I happened to be driving through Pennsylvania just a week ago and took a little detour into old Schuylkill County, the setting of this entire saga. I got to drive through some of the main towns and cities that are still, that were in this story and are still there today. I think the biggest ones being Mahanoy City, Shenandoah, and Girardville. And I can report that it is still rough country up the mountain there, and they are still bringing coal out of the ground, and they're still shipping it out on some version, some iteration of the Reading Coal and Iron Company. I saw that on some of the train cars and on the tracks and stuff. So yeah, I think right through Mahanoy City, there's like an elevated train track that has Reading Coal and Iron on it. At least that could have been old type, but I think some iteration of the company does still exist. They certainly were. There's a huge coal field. I feel like when you're kind of driving on that mountain road, I think before you get to Mahanoy City, and then also maybe before you get into Girardville, which is where Blackjack Kehoe was the high constable. And specifically, I attempted to go to the old Hibernian house, the famous tavern where all of the Molly intrigues were plotted and planned, which is still owned by the descendants of Blackjack Kehoe. I think John Kehoe is one of them, and there's another one that has a different name. But sadly, it was closed on a Friday afternoon and had a sign on it that I think said, closed maybe next weekend, Happy St. Patrick's Day. And this is in the beginning of April, so I assume it's been closed. And curiously, a Ukrainian flag dangling from the second-story window. But yeah, very interesting, though. I mean, there's a little picture of Blackjack Kehoe and a little drawing of a mine shaft and a little Irish flag and stuff. And I think Girardville is the only town. I was only there for minutes, but I think I almost saw there are people there, but I don't think I saw a single car driving or person walking around. So it had this kind of ghostly kind of vibe to it. But I'm glad I got to see that region for the first time, because I've sort of pictured it in my imagination and looked at old photos and things like that. And, I don't even know if Google Street View goes up there, but it always hits different when you see it. When you see that gray, strangely colored sky and, the blackened turf on both sides of the road and just these mountains of black gold and collieries and trains and things like that. But I will say, I'm sad I wasn't able to get a picture of this, but I swear, as I was driving into Girardville, there was a little sign on the side of the road that said something along the lines of, like, Francis McAndrew Memorial Highway. Which, if anybody, if you've been keeping track of this series, Frank McAndrew was the Shenandoah body master of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, who I think is depicted in the movie as being, sentenced to hang, but actually was not hanged. And I don't even know. Do you remember if Frank McAndrew was actually charged? Because one of these books mentions that he fled during the time of all of these arrests. I think that's right, kind of around the time where we left off. When they finally swooped in and arrested a lot of these guys, Frank McAndrew and his family fled the region. And then I forget if it was the sons of Molly Maguire, maybe mentioned that like a few years after all of this, the finale of this whole drama, he came back to Schuylkill County and actually tried to get a job with the Reading, I don't know if the coal and iron company or just get a job as a miner, but apparently he like wrote a letter to Franklin Gowen asking for a job because, as we will kind of see here, he did kind of tip off McParlan, right? Or James McKenna. He kind of saved his life, right?
Yeah, in a way. Also, like, he, when he became body master, like, that basically helped McParlan greatly because McParlan was able to become secretary of the lodge since McAndrew couldn't read or write.
Exactly.
So basically he was like keeping all the minutes of their meetings and things like that, which, for a spy would be a perfect position.
Yeah. But I could only imagine. I mean, it also it's possible it was named after one of his descendants because it was like Francis J. McAndrew Highway or something like that. So I thought that's too close to be a complete coincidence. Like there's probably a relation going on. Though when I read that part in the book there, it did make me wonder, was Frank McAndrew considered a squealer of some kind or, not trustworthy as some others like Muff Lawler and Jimmy Powderkeg Kerrigan were, where I think Muff Lawler went back to Shenandoah and was not charged. And, after all of this happens, and he was continuously berated on the street and people would sing those like songs about Muff the Squealer and be like, Muff, you squealer, and like make his life uncomfortable. But it seems like out of the McAndrews, I guess, he didn't testify. He never, went to court and ratted on his buddies. So I guess, either he came back and then became kind of like a prominent guy in that area again, or his descendants were also kind of prominent. But you could see the way that Jack Kehoe's descendants uphold his memory, that you can definitely see evidence of kind of Molly Maguire pride to a certain degree, or
for sure.
That type of pride, that type of immigrant pride still kind of exists. Though today it's much more of a mixture of like several different groups because there were subsequent waves that often were brought in by the railroads and the coal companies to like divide the workers so they wouldn't form a union. So then I think after this period of troubles with Irish workers, you start to get Italians, then you start to get Polish, Ukrainian, I think Hungarian, etc., like a lot of Eastern European workers after that. And, eventually they do all find solidarity with one another. But so you have this kind of tapestry of like specific ethnic groups that were brought over there over the course of maybe 50 years that then kind of got, all kind of absorbed into this like militant labor tradition. And, it is a fascinating part of American history. But I guess, today we can deal with the scandalous climax of like this whole drama, which is, and it is appropriate to call it a drama because this is really, theatrical justice or injustice is put on stage and becomes a sold out show in little old Schuylkill County.
Yes.
Starring the silk topper who almost was, an eternal silk topper, Franklin Gowen, as the star prosecutor. So I read what I think is the only biography and like extended work about Franklin B. Gowen's life, The Ruler of the Reading, which I think was published in the 1940s. And I think notably for the 40s, it's still a pretty critical book about Franklin Gowen.
Yeah.
You know, and like even in this this story, but there's actually quite a bit in these kind of 2 chapters near the end of the book just about these trials, because in a way, it was sort of the climax of Franklin B. Gowen's life and prestige, and his entire career in business was this trial, and arguably, you know, his sort of direct impact on, I don't know, the politics and economic life in you know, this kind of early Gilded Age. So I think maybe it's good to jump in. I have chapter 9 here, Laying the Foundations, where it starts to talk about the very first. We had talked about the Wiggins Patch Massacre, where the O'Donnells the O'Donnell clan were descended upon by this ambiguous sort of nativist militia that had some pretty disturbing connections to like local prominent business people, right? Local Anglo-Saxon business heads. Like we talked about the meat market butcher sign with the Pinkerton eye kind of outside of it.
The eye as a symbol for a butcher. Yeah.
Very disturbing.
Yeah.
And, you know, several people were killed, including, you know, one of the O'Donnell daughters. Old Mrs. O'Donnell was pistol whipped. And, you know, Friday O'Donnell fled, and a couple others. I think Charles McAllister was murdered. No. Sorry. Friday's brother, I think Charles O'Donnell was brutally executed. And then McAllister and Friday O'Donnell, like, jumped out of a window and, like, ran away and escaped. And then, and then I think Ellen McAllister was shot in the chest with a revolver. Yeah, we see this like this vigilantism kind of climaxing in that. And meanwhile, we know the Pinkerton detective, James McParlan, a.k.a. James McKenna, has wiggled his way into like the deepest confidences of this group of militant, you know, Irishmen that are kind of at this point involved in like a gang war with like local militias and proxies of the Reading Coal and Iron Company. So I guess, I'll just start reading here, and I'll just sort of jump down to the opening of the trials, etc., and get us situated. So the author here writes, when the trial of the J.P. Jones murderers was postponed at the October term of the Carbon County Court because the defense counsel managed to have the jury panel thrown out in a technicality, the case seemed to be following the traditional pattern: delay, disappearance of the Commonwealth witnesses, an alibi for the defendant, and acquittal. For the first time, however, a strong body of evidence was backed by the determined will of Franklin Gowen and his fellow coal magnates. The juggernaut which he had created was rolling relentlessly on its path to crush the ancient order of Hibernians, although the hand that was guiding it was still concealed. The machine itself was, in fact, very much a secret. When Doyle, the first of the prisoners to be tried, was brought into the dingy mock-chunk courtroom in January 1876, the case was regarded as a conventional murder trial. Of the metropolitan newspapers, only the Philadelphia Times scented the news possibilities enough to send a reporter. The Philadelphia Inquirer did not even mention the trial. The local journals, however, were covering the trial thoroughly. The Shenandoah Herald's Tom Fielders scribbling away rapidly, trying to get down all the testimony. Remember, the Herald was the Benjamin Bannon paper, but I think Bannon had retired around this time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. As his dream was crushed of small business utopia. So the courtroom was filled to the doors with excited spectators for the opening of the trial. In the crowd, the supercilious Times man noted, quote, the usual variety of shabby-looking rustics, dilapidated village loafers, the women with gaudy red shawls and crying babies, together with an unusually large sprinkling of sturdy fellows whose hard features, marked with blue spots of scars, proclaimed them anthracite miners. The prisoner at the bar, Michael J. Doyle, was, according to the same reporter, quote, a strongly built man, 5 feet 10 inches high, and about 30 years of age. He has dark brown hair and a tawny mustache and goatee. His forehead is square and of medium height, and his jaw is heavy. He has a dogged and defiant expression, and looks more like a prize fighter or Fourth Ward rough than anything else I can think of. A raid against Doyle was the best legal talent money could hire, since the Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company was using its funds to prosecute the murderer of one of its superintendents. Going down there, they brought all these fancy lawyers. The defense attorneys fought a valiant delaying action for their client, exhausting every legal stratagem to postpone the trial, but each technicality was quickly overruled. 3 days were required to fill the jury box. There were no Irish names on the panel, but the defense succeeded in getting a few Pennsylvania Dutch jurors who had difficulty in understanding the testimony. That would become a motif in the later trials of getting all Pennsylvania Dutch juries. I did go to one gas station in Indiana where there were a bunch of Pennsylvania Dutch people speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. I'd never seen that before in my life, but they're still out. They had a big van. They had they had all these babies and grandmas, and everyone was wearing these shawls, and they were like, and I was like, oh my God, wait, what? Like, okay, anyways, no, sorry not to be, I'll bleep that out. I'll bleep that out, but they sounded Dutch, and I feel like, no,
don't bleep it out, because it's going to sound worse than it was. I don't know, maybe,
I generally have an impulse of like, oh, I can make fun of Dutch people, but then I'm like, well, they're our countrymen, so, maybe I should make fun of them. I respect their lifestyle and their language. More in this context, I guess. But anyways, I guess it's funny, both sides, both the defense and the prosecutors at various trials thought that it would be an advantage to have Pennsylvania Dutch jurors. Like, in this case, it's the defense that thinks so, but then later, like, Gowen is going to, like, want entire juries of them, basically. I think once they realize that they're not super sympathetic to the Irish, I think they're like, oh, this is great. Anyways, all of these efforts proved of little avail, however, as the Commonwealth proceeded with its overwhelming evidence. Step by step, 122 witnesses traced the movement of the murderers from the day before the shooting to the time of their arrest. While no one had seen the actual murder, Doyle and Kelly were identified as the men who had fled from the scene with revolvers in their hands. Only at one point was the prosecution's case weak, in the absence of any provable motive. The Commonwealth attorneys were being kept informed of all of McKenna's reports and knew how Alex Campbell had arranged with Jimmy Kerrigan for Jones's murder, but they had no way to get that story into the evidence. The best they could do was to introduce the AOH buttons found on the prisoners and a scrap of paper, alleged to be part of a note from Jeremiah Kane, bodymaster at Mount Laffey, to James Carroll, and to intimate that the Hibernians were responsible for the assassination. Feeble as these bits of evidence were, the steady succession of identifications of Doyle as one of the murderers was sufficient. Wow. In what was intended to be a surprise move, the prisoners' lawyers announced they would call no witnesses. The courtroom rumbled in astonishment, but the prosecution showed that they had been prepared for this step by announcing that they were ready to address the jury. After the conclusion of the arguments on Monday, January 31st, the jury retired and returned the next morning with a verdict of murder in the first degree, the first time such a verdict had ever been reached in Carbon County. Meanwhile, Gowen's plans had received an important break. Jimmy Powderkeg Kerrigan, who was mistrusted by his comrades, had been listening to the evidence with dismay and felt the hemp tightening around his own neck. When the last witness had been called, he sent word to the prosecuting attorneys that he wanted to confess. On the basis of information he gave, plans were made to arrest the 6 persons implicated by his story. The following Friday morning, the Coal and Iron Police swooped down on Alex Campbell, James Rorty, James Carroll, Thomas Duffy, James Boyle, and Hugh McGeehan. After the arrest had been made, the story of the confession was announced, although Kerrigan's name was not revealed until a week later, when he was brought to Pottsville for the habeas corpus hearings for the prisoners. As he was driven from the station, a crowd gathered to shout at the squealer. An Irish undertaker who cried, "Drive him into the creek, the son of a bitch," was arrested for trying to incite a riot. I hope that was one of my great-great-grandfathers. He was an undertaker, but not in Pottsville. But, all right, based undertaker. Although the newspapers were not allowed to give any of the testimony at the hearings, one reporter did note that the prisoners were upset when Kerrigan took the stand. With the arrest of the 6 men accused by Kerrigan, the time had come for more action. Tom Hurley, Mike Doyle, and Friday O'Donnell had already disappeared, and others might leave at any time. Even though there was still no usable evidence against the Sanger-Urine murders, Gowen's Coal and Iron Police seized Charles McAllister and Thomas Munley for the crime. It was given out that these arrests were also based on Kerrigan's confession, but the Hibernians knew that the little Irishman had no knowledge of the Raven Run assassination. Okay, so here's when we briefly touched on this last time, but this is like McParlan/McKenna's escape. But this book actually does a good kind of like summary of the beat by beat and just how narrow it was. So the members of the AOH began searching their ranks anxiously, looking for another traitor in their midst. McKenna, still assiduously, quote, sparking Kerrigan's sister-in-law, Marianne Higgins, in Tamaqua, he thoughtfully took along a pint of whiskey for her father. That actually is in the movie, I guess, a little bit. Yeah, he does like befriend like the old man, the father. Anyways, talked on February 16th to Marianne and her sister, Mrs. Kerrigan, who told him that when Carol and the others had been arrested, some people had said that he was a detective, but no one believed it, maintaining that Kerrigan was the informer. McKenna appreciated their confidence in him. He was also interested in Mrs. Kerrigan's plan to pin the Yost murder on her squealing husband. Oh, that's right. Mrs. Kerrigan kind of got to support her because she just like hates her husband for like squealing and it's like, fuck him. Like, actually, let's pin all the murders on him. Like, fuck him. Anyways, so yeah, I guess she wanted to plan the Yost murder, which is a policeman murder, on her squealing husband. Marianne said that Charles Mulhern would swear that he had sold Kerrigan the pistol used in the murder and suggested that her sister should produce a few cartridges for the gun and say she had found them in his drawer. The detective listened to this proposal with mixed feelings, since he really liked the young Irish girl, but he faithfully reported the plot to his superiors. The word from the Higgins girls was a warning, however, that he could not play the game out much longer. In fact, his disguise might have been pierced long before, had it not been for the simple, trusting nature of his Hibernian friends. None of his stories to account for his presence in the coal region and his income had been very plausible, and only his rollicking good nature had prevented suspicion arising sooner. Sometime before, he had cashed a check from Pinkerton's detective agency to James McParlan at a Shenandoah bank, giving the bank employees a clue as to his real identity, which, fortunately, they kept to themselves. Damn, that's sloppy OPSEC, bro. Yeah. After Superintendent Franklin had begun sending information from his reports to the Tamaqua authorities, they also had a good idea that McKenna was a detective. Summaries of the reports were also going to the DA of Schuylkill County, who must have guessed the identity of the inside man. Such rumors could not long be kept from the ears of the Hibernians. The arrest of Munley and McAllister was the clinching evidence that Kerrigan was not the only traitor in the order. Kehoe heard a report as to the identity of the second informer on the train one day. The conductor called him into the baggage car to ask him if he had seen McKenna lately. Then the railroad man went on to say that he had heard McKenna was a detective. The Girardville saloon keeper sent his wife down to Pottsville to warn the Hibernians who were gathering there for the Munley-McAllister habeas corpus hearings. McKenna was startled that morning to learn from his friend, Frank McAndrew, of the highway, perhaps, maybe, that men on the train had been making bets that he would go on the stand as a detective. Learning in Danny Hughes' saloon that Kehoe had been sending the word around, he promptly set off for Girardville to brazen the matter out. When Kehoe revealed the source of his information, McKenna demanded that he be tried before a county convention and given a chance to prove his innocence. Kehoe agreed that was fair and asked him to write out notices to the body masters for a meeting in Shenandoah on March 2nd. Meanwhile, the rumor that McKenna was a detective was flying all over the county. Some even said that he wanted the special meeting that the coal and iron police might gather in all the leaders at one time. The day before the scheduled convention, McKenna met Kehoe in Pottsville and noticed that he seemed anxious to know whether the Pinkerton man was going to Shenandoah that night. He also noted that the county delegate shortly afterwards disappeared from Pottsville. By this time, McKenna was worried enough to see a murderer in every Irishman. When he arrived in Shenandoah on the late train, he took it as a foreboding sign that none of the usual welcoming friends were at the station to greet him. Those he met on the street seemed nervous and silent. One, Ed Sweeney, accompanied him to Frank McAndrew's, but McKenna was careful to walk behind him. Once inside, Sweeney said he was going home, but soon returned and tossed a piece of snow on McAndrew. The body master, with a look at McKenna, said, quote, "My feet are sore. I guess I will take off my boots." To the suspicious eyes of the detective, this looked like a signal of some kind, and on his way home he cut across the swamp instead of taking his usual route.
All right.
This is funny that like their code words are kind of random. It's like, the weather is nice. The queen must despise it. And it's like, you know, it's just like fucking, I've got a pebble in my shoe. Something like that. And then, I don't know. So he goes to the swamp. And then next morning, only 2 of the body masters showed up for the convention. Determined to find out why the meeting had been called off, McKenna hired a cutter and started for Gerardville with McAndrew. On the way, the detective's friend informed him that Kehoe had been in town the day before, plotting his assassination. Wow, so he really did, warn him straight up. McAndrew did. Mm-hmm. The saloon keeper had told McAndrew, quote, "For God's sake, have McKenna killed tonight, or you'll hang half the people in Schuylkill County." Although the Shenandoah body master had appeared to consent, he assured McKenna, "I do not know whether you are a detective or not, but I do not know anything against you. I always knew you were doing right, and I will stand by you. Why don't they try you fair?" No, McAndrew, he was right. Yeah. A mob had been gathered near the station the night before, McAndrew explained, to beat him to death, and a man named Dennis Dowling, who was riding in the sleigh behind them, had come from Mount Laffey for his assassination. In the state of McKenna's nerves, he did not stop to consider the possibility that his friend, convinced he was a detective, might have contrived this story in order to win his protection from the authorities. Instead, he accepted it as confirming his suspicions of Kehoe, but he was not deterred from his plan of facing down the chief Hibernian. Confronting him in his Gerardville saloon, the one I tried to visit, McKenna demanded to know why the trial had not been held. To the detective, Kehoe seemed startled to see his intended victim still alive, but he replied that he had decided there was no need for a trial. McKenna boldly responded that he thought so too, since he was entirely innocent of the accusations. The tavern keeper declared that he had called off the meeting because he had received definite information that McKenna was a detective, and added, quote, "You can go to Father O'Connor and see him about it. You will find it all out. That's all I have to say." Taking, quote, the opportunity of blowing a little, as he expressed it, the Pinkerton man answered angrily, "I will go to Father O'Connor, but I do not give a cent for any man in this county." At Mahanoy Plain, he did not find the priest at home, but a saloon keeper told him that Dowling had tried to borrow a gun in order to shoot him right there. Back in Shenandoah at McAndrew's home, the body master asked him to spend the night there instead of going to his boarding house. Next afternoon, McAndrew told them that it had been lucky he had not gone home, since strangers had been hanging out about the boarding house all night. Although they had left an old carpet bag behind them as a sign that they were only tramps, McKenna was certain they had been after him. On March 4th, he finally got to see Father O'Connor, who had just returned from Philadelphia. Before he entered the room, he had heard an eavesdropper come into the next room and pull up his chair to the door. The detective was therefore careful to speak loudly so that all his words would be carried to the ears of other Hibernians. He told the priest that he was James McKenna, the man whom he had done much wrong by representing him as a detective. The report, he went on, had ruined him in the estimation of some of his fellow citizens, and he would like Father O'Connor to deny it, since it was not true. The priest replied that, although he did not know McKenna, he had heard of him and had been told that he was a detective. While he did not disapprove of the use of detectives to investigate crimes, he was informed that his visitor had had knowledge of crimes before they happened and had not prevented them. In fact, had even taken part in some.
Yeah.
Such conduct he had to condemn. Time and again he had warned his people that an evil fate awaited them if they did not mend their ways. Now they must suffer the consequences. McKenna took the occasion to defend the Hibernians in a loud tone for the benefit of the man outside the door. He declared that the order was a good society, unjustly charged with many crimes which it had tried to prevent. To the accusation that he had been seen in Kerrigan's company, he replied that he had merely been courting Kerrigan's sister-in-law, bringing a laugh to the priest's face. Father O'Connor conceded that the priests in Shenandoah and Mahanoy City knew more about the matter than he did. Oh my God. The original spy network. If his guest would see them and convince them that he was not a detective, he'd be glad to convey the information to his congregation. McKenna promised to call on the other priests at once. This, however, he had no intention of doing. Instead, he left for Philadelphia the next morning. As he told Captain Linden, he had concluded that his fellow Hibernians had had a peep at his hand, and the cards were all played. Since his role as a detective had been so fully revealed, his usefulness in the coal region seemed ended. As it turned out, his usefulness had scarcely begun. When he had undertaken the investigation, he had been promised that he would never have to testify so that criminals convicted through his efforts would not be moved to reprisals. Now that his mission stood revealed, there was no longer much reason for keeping him off the witness stand. Gowen appealed to Pinkerton to lift the ban on his detective's testimony. Pinkerton left the decision up to the operative, who talked the matter over with the Reading president. Gowen's charm and persuasiveness went to work on the erstwhile McKenna. When Gowen ceased, McParlan sat silent for a full 5 minutes, then, putting aside his fears of assassination, promised to return to the coal region and take the witness stand. To guarantee his operative's safety, Pinkerton assigned 2 officers to act as his bodyguard. This good fortune gave Gowen the opportunity to exploit the full dramatic possibilities of the detective's adventures. Up to now, the trials had been moving along without attracting much attention beyond the immediate vicinity. The trial of Edward Kelly, the second of the Jones murderers, was, in fact, almost dull, since it virtually duplicated the Doyle testimony. The only interesting variation was the clever stratagem of Kelly's lawyers in seating beside him a brother who closely resembled him. This succeeded in confusing one of the witnesses into the wrong identification, but had no effect on the outcome, which was a speedy verdict of murder in the first degree. Public attention outside the coal region began to be aroused when the Bethlehem Times on April 5th printed what purported to be Jimmy Kerrigan's confession. Although its scooped rival, the Shenandoah Herald, denounced this document as spurious, the confession probably was based on testimony at the habeas corpus hearings. It was, in any rate, sensational. According to the Times, Kerrigan said of the Hibernians, quote, "That is the order of the Molly Maguires and nothing else. The purpose of the Molly Maguires, or AOH, is to kill people and burn down dwellings. The notion is that it is to protect working men, but really they are all of the most hardened villains in the place where they reside. If anyone wants any work done, they inform the headman known as bodymaster or president, and he calls a meeting. 2 or 3 men are usually appointed to do such work."
Very dramatic performance here.
I'm going to have to warm up for Gowen. Gowen's like wasp Shakespearean monologues are off the chain. So this was widely reprinted in the metropolitan newspapers and awakened interest in the Molly Maguires. In some quarters, it was assumed all Hibernians were murderous ruffians. The Bethlehem Steel Company, for example, ordered all its employees who were members to withdraw from the AOH or be dismissed. The Catholic clergy in dioceses which had tolerated the order now began to denounce it. At a conference of Catholic societies in New York City, the AOH was conspicuously uninvited. So, now we get to Gowen's kind of like his big plan. This conception fitted in with Gowen's plan to convict not only the murderers, but the organization as well. Having obtained McParlan's consent to testify, he was now ready to put the plan into operation at the first trial held in Schuylkill County. This was on the indictment of James Carroll, James Rorty, James Boyle, Hugh McGeehan, and Thomas Duffy for the murder of Yost. 4 hours before the defendants were brought in, the Pottsville courthouse was jammed with people who had come to watch the selection of the jury. No details had been left to chance. A full bench of 3 judges presided over the court. Aiding the young DA, George Kersher, were Frank Hughes, General Albright, and another Pottsville lawyer, Guy E. Farquhar. The second day, Franklin B. Gowen himself appeared to join them. For the defense, there were 3 of the men who had acted at Mock Chunk, Bartholomew Ryan, and Kalbfuss, with a local Irishman, Martin Lavelle. All right. The jury was chosen with great care by the prosecution. The defending attorneys reflected the change in public opinion since the Doyle trial by their own tactics. Then they had tried to get Pennsylvania Dutchmen on the jury in the hope that their difficulty in understanding English would lead them to vote for acquittal. Now they feared they would be so prejudiced that the same difficulty would cause them to vote for conviction. When one talesman, William Becker, said, "I am light on English. I would not understand the witnesses," the defense objected, but he became a juror nevertheless. Wow. Saturday, May 6th was a day of sensation. In his opening speech, the district attorney revealed for the first time that James McKenna, a detective whose real name was James McParlan, would take the stand. The news stunned the prisoners. Carroll looked as if he had been struck by lightning and could scarcely get his breath. Boyle shook like an aspen, and the other defendants became grave as judges. A thrill of excitement and astonishment went through the audience. And then, after that speech, he announced another ripple of rumor ran through the courtroom. And then the Shenandoah announced that there were 11 more men were being led to jail in chains. Jack Kehoe, Schuylkill County delegate, Dennis Canning, Chris Donnelly, Muff Lawler, Pat Butler, and half a dozen other Mollies. While the charges against new prisoners were not revealed, the arrest seemed added confirmation on the guilt of the organization. After Yost's widow and the doctor had established the death of Yost, the name of James McParlan was called. Everyone rushed to the rail to watch the side door. It opened to admit the detective, accompanied by Captain Linden and his 2 bodyguards. Dressed in the height of fashion, he presented a strange contrast to those who had known him as the rowdy James McKenna. Sworn as a witness, he answered the questions in a straightforward manner, without hesitation, outlining the background of the Yost murder as he had learned it. Probably by intention, he made his story favorable to Kerrigan and said that it was Duffy who had wanted Yost killed. That was sufficient evidence for the purposes of the trial, but Gowen wanted to go further and bring out all the facts that had been learned about the Hibernians. When the defense objected to this line of proof, Gowen had his first opportunity to denounce the Mollies in court. He vehemently asserted that he would make the order in Schuylkill County so odious that to have belonged to it would be prima facie evidence of guilt. Wow, okay. The very courthouse was full of Mollies, he declared. He would show that one of the county commissioners was a member of the order and that another member had been placed in charge of the jail where the prisoners were kept. The fallacy in Gowen's reasoning was, as usual, so concealed by his oratory that it was not apparent even to him. The evidence to be offered would not prove that every member of the Hibernians was cognizant of the murderous acts of the other members and therefore equally guilty. In fact, it would prove quite the opposite. Nevertheless, the presumption had been created in the public mind that membership in the Hibernians was evidence of guilt, as Gowen had stated. Once the judges had agreed to admit this line of testimony, revelations followed swiftly. Having whetted its appetite for sensation on Kerrigan's confession, the public now had a chance to gorge itself. In the papers, people read how McParlan had said that the general practice and only object of the AOH in Schuylkill County was to protect and avenge its members. A member stated his grievance to his bodymaster and such fellow members as were considered trustworthy. If vengeance were considered justified, the bodymaster selected some member of the division unknown to the party to be injured or asked another bodymaster for men. Gradually, McParlan unfolded the whole tale of his adventures in the coal regions. It was, as it has been ever since, romance of the first water. Newspaper readers snatched up the story with avidity, and editors who had ignored it hastily dispatched their best reporters to Pottsville. The defense attorneys used all their skill in attempts to impugn McParlan's character and his testimony. They combed his background and could find nothing worse than that he had changed jobs frequently. When they charged that he had been motivated by prospects of financial gain, he explained that he was barred from receiving any reward other than his salary of $12 a week in expenses, which went on regardless of what he discovered. John Ryan's accusation that he had instigated crimes and failed to prevent them found him on more shaky ground. In his efforts to establish a villainous character, he had come perilously near to provoking crimes if he had not actually done so. Whenever an attempt to inform the authorities of a murder plot would have endangered his own life, he had not made it. Nevertheless, all the ability of the lawyers for the prisoners could not shake him. When one of them tried to confuse him over the details of similar conversations in Carroll's saloon on the 4th and 24th of August, he replied, "Mr. Bartholomew, you keep running between the 4th and the 24th, but you don't shake the evidence a bit." Okay, McParlan. So one observer, after 4 days of testimony, one observer noted that McParlan created the impression that he has done a splendid work. By his coolness, deliberation, carefulness, and positiveness, he has proven himself the sharpest and best witness ever on the stand in the courtroom. He is doubtless, best ever. He has doubtless created ever. An ineffaceable impression on the jury.
All time, I guess.
All time, not just Pennsylvania.
All time best witness. All right.
Right. So then, going on, then Jimmy Kerrigan gets brought in, clad in a new suit and quite pleased over his unwanted prominence. The little Irishman told the full story of the fatal July 5th, blah, 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 until Yost was shot. He says that Jimmy was careful to transform himself from the ringleader he had been into an innocent tool. Only after he joined the Hibernians, he said, had he found out what a villainous organization it was. He explained away his position as bodymaster by saying that he had been acting for Jim Carroll. It was not he, but Tom Duffy, who had wished the policeman killed. Okay, yeah, so then he tells his version of the story and blames it on people who probably didn't do it because Kerrigan did it, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, then I believe that the defense calls Jimmy Kerrigan's wife to the stand and also the sister Marianne, who McParlan had been courting. So they had contrived, this story with alibis and everything, but it was anticlimactic because McParlan had already testified that like they were going to make up a story. And then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So she tried very hard, Mrs. Kerrigan, to like to prove her husband's guilt and be like, he did it, kill him, like basically.
Right.
And Gowen kind of like harassed her at one point. It says, although her testimony was true in many of its details, it collapsed under cross-examination. When Gowen questioned her about the detective's visit on February 16th, she denied that she had been there, or that he had been there. After each question, she appeared to hesitate before answering. To Gowen's inquiry as to the reason for the pause, she replied that it was her heart trouble, whereupon the attorney aroused a gale of laughter by asking, "How is it you never get heart disease when Mr. Ryan questions you?" Ha ha ha. Yeah, so he's in the courtroom now, directly fucking cross-examining all these Irish people, basically, having the time of his life. So then I guess this trial actually ends up in a mistrial because one of the Pennsylvania Dutch jurors catches pneumonia and dies. So basically they have to they decide, I guess the remaining jurors decide to try the case again. And it says the effort Gowen had put into the trial had not been wasted. The testimony brought forth had convinced the public of the guilt of the ancient order of Hibernians, commented the Miners' Journal, which less than a year before had been scoffing at the Molly rumors, quote, "When Detective McParlan took the stand and revealed the secrets of the mysterious organization known as Molly Maguire's, even those who had had most experience of their lawless acts were astonished and terrified. Men realized, as they had never done before, by how slender a thread they held their lives. And as he proceeded with his story, the wonder grew, not that so many men had been killed by the Mollies, but that so many had escaped them. Though long talked about and believed by the community generally, there were many who had never been satisfied of the existence of this crew of cutthroats, while those who most firmly believed in their existence were not prepared for a story of such diabolical crimes as the witness swore to. These lawless wretches seem to have thrown aside all restraint, all respect for law and for the opinion of mankind, and all dread of consequences, and given themselves up to the unrestrained indulgence of their own evil passions." Damn. Okay. So
wow.
yeah,
all right.
whips up this fucking hysteria. So now the Molly meme is just taking off. So yeah, the author here does note, overlooked in the general hysteria was the long period of comparative quiet that had preceded McParlan's arrival, the singular ineptitude of the would-be assassins, as described by the witnesses, etc. The public had accepted Gowen's charge that a member of the Hibernians was by that very fact a criminal. Convictions thereafter would come easy. So he's set up the whole game, and now this chapter, the Mollies in Court, chapter 10, is really where we get like Gowen firing off these monologues and giving like the performance of a lifetime, which I guess starts with him slandering John Siney, the WBA leader. So they say, outside of the coal region, the sensational aspects of the case created a journalistic field day. Belatedly awakening to what was going on, the Philadelphia Inquirer denounced the Molly Maguires as, quote, red-handed assassins, and ran 2 long background articles on the organization. Although no source was revealed, they bore the imprint of Gowen's theories. Highly colored and inaccurate, they called John Siney, who had worked 7 years in the mines, quote, a pettifogger who had never handled a pick in his life, and said that he had organized the, quote, National Labor Union during the Civil War, which was not only wrong, but irrelevant. The National Labor Union. He just he made a scary national union, just, just a general union during the Civil War. So they say that, they declared that Molly Maguireism had become rampant at the time the Coal and Iron Company was formed, which was exactly the time it had been least noticed. This publicity also cleverly, if unwittingly, transferred the opprobrium now attached to the Hibernians to the late Union. Following Gowen's reasoning, the articles charged that the Molly Maguires had dominated the WBA, that they controlled the local government, and that they had organized and maintained the strike of 1875 by appropriating public funds for the relief of idle miners. This was an especially sore point with Gowen, since his company paid most of the taxes which went to support the strikers. Oh no. Of these accusations, only the claim that the Mollies managed a local government had any relation to the facts. It was true the Hibernians had been a powerful political factor and had elected members to office, but they had never dominated the local government, nor had many members of the order risen to positions of leadership in the Union, although all who worked in the mines had been compelled to join. The heads of the WBA, in fact, as we went over last time, had done their best to control the radical element represented by the Hibernians. A frightening picture of conditions in the coal region was painted by the Inquirer, quote, "To recite the outrages of which President Gowen's company and its employees were the victims would be to print a volume of murder, plunder, and incendiarism, which, for fiendish violence, would read like a romance. Threatening notices made fences, trees, and houses hideous with their brutal devices. Scarce a day passed without its blood-curdling tragedy. Men who were tired of idleness and would gladly have gone back to work dared not. To labor was to provoke the wrath of the Molly Maguires. Next came an order to leave the region, or a bullet, which cut short the offender's life. Breakers were fired, storehouses robbed, workmen butchered, guards shot, and anarchy reigned supreme." Oh my God, calm down. This is like what the Tesla is getting set on fire right now. This is like how people are reacting to it. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's on a national level, I guess. I mean, it kind of was then, but yeah.
Yeah, they need to find the national labor union leader that's that's orchestrating
behind this. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, let's see. This conception that the Mollies had been responsible for the violence of the strikes was also to become part of the tradition. It was a charge which Gowen had frequently made and was often to make again, despite the lack of much evidence other than his own firm conviction. While publicity in the metropolitan papers could have little effect on the outcome of the trials, it was the kind of meat on which Gowen thrived. Most of the publicity, however, was still to come, since the Order of Hibernians had not yet been formally convicted. So then Alexander Campbell was brought on trial in Mock Chunk for the murder of John Paul Jones. So there's more wrangling. McParlan came on the stand again, and Kerrigan. There wasn't really good evidence to convict Alexander Campbell for this killing. Yeah, that was enough. Yeah, this is interesting. Interesting line from the Miners' Journal here. "The solid men, the ones with the cash, the heavy men, the men of influence, reputation, and respectability are all delighted. Nothing more, nothing less. They believe Campbell is guilty. None but Mr. Kalbfuss, and he probably don't in his own mind, thinks he is not. They believe Kerrigan tells the truth from beginning to end, keeping back nothing, not injuring himself more than he can help, but telling the whole truth in regard to others." Yeah, so, prompt verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree 11 days after the trial began, even though there's like a lot of witnesses were like messing up their testimony and everything. Then Thomas Munley is brought in for the murder of Sanger and Uren. The case against Munley was slim, consisting only of his admission to McParlan of his guilt and some rather dubious identifications by persons who had seen the crime. Out of 12 eyewitnesses examined in one day, only 2 were able to say that Munley had been one of the murderers. One of these was a woman who had not been subpoenaed, but who had seen the profile of a man passing her house that morning with a pistol in his hand. When she told friends she had recognized Munley in the courtroom as that man, she was put on the stand. Okay.
Nice.
Taking heart, the defense once again attempted to establish an alibi. Munley's father, brother, and sister testified he'd been at home that morning. And then, they could remember details clearly, etc. This was an interesting little moment that happens in this trial that kind of backfires on the defense. Little more success crowned the efforts of the defense to attack McParlan's character. Ned Monahan of Shenandoah, who was the ex-constable, an ex-Hibernian, and ex-friend of the erstwhile McKenna, took the stand to tell the worst he knew. He declared that at the Hibernian ball in Shenandoah the previous autumn, McKenna had talked about killing Tom Fielders, a Shenandoah Herald reporter, and tossing him out of a window. On another occasion, he said, his constabulary duties had required him to arrest the detective for stealing a watch and fighting with a peddler. He also remembered that at the meeting which had been held to decide on the death of Thomas, it had been McKenna who had done most of the talking and who had said he had come to settle Bully Bill. While the constable was on the stand, this testimony sounded damaging. The Commonwealth, however, promptly called Tom Fielders to state that Monahan had not said anything about McKenna the night of the ball. Other witnesses explained away the story of the arrest by showing that another person had taken the peddler's watch for a joke, and the peddler had blamed the theft on McKenna, who, knowing nothing about the incident, had become angry. The net result of this attack on the detective was that Monahan himself was promptly arrested for his admitted attendance at the beating to decide the fate of Bully Bill. So, like, he implicates fucking McParlan as being there and like a driving force of the conspiracy, and like the only takeaway from that is like, oh, you were there, so like we're gonna arrest you for conspiracy to murder also. So that's how Ned Monahan ended up on trial, but then like nothing happens to McParlan. So they tried to make the best of it. Martin Lavelle, and I think I might have some Lavelles in my distant coal country family, like by marriage or something. I recognize that name. It's weird that it has an apostrophe. It looks French, but like he's Irish Catholic apparently.
Right.
But anyways, Martin Lavelle, who was their lawyer, rang the charges of religious and racial persecution of the struggle between capital and labor. He pointed out that no Irishman had been allowed to sit on the jury. Lynn Bartholomew stressed that although evidence had been introduced to show the criminal character of the Hibernians and Munley's connection with the order, there had been none to show any connection between the society and the shooting of Sanger. But whatever effect those arguments might have had on the Pennsylvania Dutch farmers on the jury, it was swept away by the tornado of Gowen's concluding speech on July 12th. So this is a big moment. It truly is a tornado of a speech. So I'll read kind of some of the highlights here. First giving an account of the shocking details of the murder, he turned to the alibi offered by the prisoner and ripped it to pieces. After showing that Michael Munley had said he had had ham for breakfast on September 3rd, he triumphantly pointed out that September 3rd had been a Friday when no Catholic would eat ham.
Wow.
I actually forget, having just gone through Lent or whatever, not that I'm like a practicing Catholic or anything, but my understanding was that's like a Lent rule that you don't eat meat on Friday, like during Lent.
I mean, it may have
Catholics
been a more widespread thing. Like I think a lot of religious practices like that like become like more
downgraded.
Yeah, they got downgraded over time. Exactly. So I feel like in the past it might have been something that people did every Friday, and now maybe they only do during Lent. So. Yeah.
That might be true. I have like vague memories, maybe hearing about like my grandmother, like, oh, she'd never cooked meat on Friday or something like that. Like,
Canons 252 and 1252 and 1253 of the 1983 Code of Canon Law, they relaxed the requirement to abstain from meat on all Fridays of the year. For those age 7 or older. But it added that bishops may permit substitution of other penitential practices for Fridays outside of Lent, but that some form of penance shall be observed on all Fridays of the year in commemoration of the day of the week of the Lord's crucifixion.
Wow.
Yeah, abstinence on all Fridays outside of Lent is still the preferred practice among many Catholics who choose to maintain this tradition rather than substituting an alternative penance. That's, just from Wikipedia, but yeah.
Wow. I feel like most American Catholics like lost that memo somewhere along the way.
Most American Catholics don't even like
they're drinking on Friday,
pray or believe in Catholicism or so.
Yeah, it's a twice a year kind of thing.
Yeah.
But all right, point to Gowen, I guess. That unless, maybe he's just eating ham. What's the big deal, But I guess he triumphantly pointed out, because they went back and forth about, like, well, what were you having for breakfast if you said you were home? And, like, you saw him that day. What did you eat for breakfast? And then he was like, well, I ate ham. And then he triumphantly pointed out that September 3rd was a Friday when no Catholic would eat ham. The young witness jumped up to deny the statement and was removed from the courtroom while Gowen read his evidence as proof of his charges. The lawyer, wow, he's like, oh, fuck you. Like, wow. The lawyer went on, quote, "Now that the light of day is thrown upon the secret workings of this association, human life is as safe in Schuylkill County as it is in any other part of this commonwealth. That as this association is broken down and trampled into the dust, its leaders either in jail or fugitives from the just vengeance of the law, the administration of justice in this court will be as certain as human life is safe throughout the whole length and breadth of the county. The time has gone by when the murderer, the incendiary, and the assassin can go home reeking from the commission of crimes, confident in the fact that he can appear before a jury and have an alibi proved for him to allow him to escape punishment. There will be no more false alibis in this county. The time for them has gone forever." Going back, he's just getting started. Going back to the days when he had been district attorney in Schuylkill County, Gowen said that it was then that he had decided that a secret criminal society existed. He explained, quote, and this is like, as we've got over, like, that does not line up with his actual experience, basically, except for maybe the Civil War years. But like, anyways, like he goes on, I left this county with that settled conviction and circumstances that occurred time and again, long after I withdrew from the prosecution of criminals, still more deeply fastened this conviction in my mind. Murder, violence, and arson, committed without detection and apparently without motive, attested the correctness of that belief, and when the time arrived that I became so much interested in the prosperity of this county and in the development of its mineral wealth, that I saw that it was a struggle between the good citizen and the bad citizen as to which should obtain the supremacy, I made up my mind that if human ingenuity, if long-suffering and patient care, and toil that stopped at no obstacle, and would confront every danger, could succeed in exposing this secret organization to light of day, and bringing to well-earned justice the perpetrators of these awful crimes, I would undertake the task. Wow, what a big man. What a big...
Yeah.
It wasn't until he became interested in the development of this county's mineral wealth that he realized it was a battle between good guys and bad guys.
Yeah.
And he had to step in. It's really wild. It's so American in so many ways. Like, I mean, it's just, you could see why it
it's
hit.
A really ain't nothing new situation for sure.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, he assures the jury and the audience to ensure that no evidence was manufactured in the hope of securing a reward, except for like literally everything McParlan did. He had arranged with Pinkerton that his detective's compensation should not vary, no matter what his discoveries. Since McParlan had been promised he should not be called to the witness stand, and his only purpose was to obtain advance notice of crime so that murderers might be caught in the act, the charges made by the defense that he had withheld information in order to allow crimes to be committed could not be true. Answering Lavelle's accusation that all these crimes had been committed since McParlan's arrival, true, he leaped nimbly over the years of quiet which had immediately preceded the advent of the detective and recited the murders of the mid-60s. He asserted, quote, "These coal fields for 20 years, I may say, have been the theater of the commission of crimes such as our very nature revolts at. This very organization that we are now, for the first time, exposing to the light of day, has hung like a pall over the people of this county. Before it, fear and terror fled cowering to homes which afforded no sanctuary against the vengeance of their pursuers. Behind it stalked darkness and despair, brooding like grim shadows over the desolated earth and the ruined home, and throughout the length and breadth of this fair land there was heard the voice of the wailing and of lamentation of, quote, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are not. Nor is it alone those whose names I have mentioned, not alone the prominent, the upright, and the good citizen whose remains have been interred with pious care in the tombs of his fathers, but it is the hundreds of unknown victims, whose bones now lie moldering over the face of this county, in hidden places and by silent paths, in the dark ravines of the mountains, in the secret ledges of the rocks. Who shall say how many bodies of the victims of this order now await the final trump of God? And from those lonely sepulchres there will go up to the God who gave them the spirits of these murdered victims to take their places among the innumerable throng of witnesses at the last day, and to confront with their presence the members of this ghastly tribunal when their solemn accusation is read from the plain command of the Decalogue, thou shalt not kill. Like, honestly, like, this guy's insane. Like, this is like a prosecution, like, addressing a jury is like pretty fucking. It makes what's his name's speech in JFK seem like incredibly mild and like not performative at all.
It's like exceeds like Aaron Sorkin like courtroom writing.
It
like,
honestly is Aaron Sorkin it's like beyond Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, it's the most like ridiculously overwrought like courtroom speech you could possibly imagine. Like no one could do it better.
Right. So he, the Sorkin speech goes on where, like, if somebody is epic enough in a courtroom, it can change history. That's the true. Sorkin way.
Yes.
So going on in reply to the charge that McParlan had allowed Thomas Hurley and Michael Doyle to escape, he declared that neither had escaped. Quote, "There is not a place on the habitable globe where these men can find refuge and in which they will not be tracked down. Let them go to the Rocky Mountains or to the shores of the Pacific. Let them traverse the bleak deserts of Siberia, penetrate into the jungles of India, or wander over the wild steppes of Central Asia, and they will be dogged and tracked and brought to justice, just as surely as Thomas Munley is brought to justice today. The time will come, be it short or be it long, be it months or be it years, when every single murderer then living on the face of this earth who had committed a crime in this county since April 1874 will answer for that crime before the presence of this court. Quote, "The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Those who see what we are doing now have seen but little, for it is only the opening of the book of this vast conspiracy, and behind the meaner men who shot the pistol there stand others far more guilty than they who, with them, at some time will be brought to justice." In Ireland, he explained, the Molly Maguires had been a terroristic organization. He did not know how the society had come to Schuylkill County, but he did know it was criminal in character. The arrest of the county delegate had proved that the whole organization was guilty. As to the charge that these men were being persecuted for their race, quote, Gowen says, "I shall say but little about the Irish, except that I am myself the son of an Irishman, proud of my ancestry and proud of my race, and never ashamed of it, except when I see that Ireland has given birth to such wretches as these. These men call themselves Irishmen. These men parade on St. Patrick's Day and claim to be good Catholics. Where are the honest Irishmen of this county? Why do they not rise up and strike down these wretches that usurp the name of Irishmen? The time has come when every honest Irishman in this county must separate himself from any suspicion of sympathy with this association. He must denounce its members as outcasts from the land that gave them birth. He must denounce them as covered with infamy and blackened with crime. He must say they are not true Irishmen and that they are not representatives of Ireland." Wow. So he's okay.
You know what? I was wondering, like, you know how like after Obama, like a lot of like Democratic politicians like started to kind of act like Obama and started to do like Obama's voice and like Obama's style of rhetoric.
You mean like the current governor,
today.
the current governor of Pennsylvania?
Yeah,
as an example.
And also like Republicans kind of now like try to be like Trump a lot. I wonder if this is like the Gettysburg Address, like it is, you know, like it's the like Lincoln effect where he's like has this like soaring rhetoric because he's trying to copy like the Gettysburg Address.
That's a good point. It's only 10 years, you know, roughly about, well, a little over 10 years past the speech of speeches, you know, like the GOAT address, you know, in American history that was such a big deal. And yeah, maybe I'll try to lean into more of an Abe kind of affect of like, the time has come when every honest Irishman in this county must separate himself from any suspicion of sympathy. It's like now I kind of sound like FDR there, but I guess that even into the early 20th century, I feel like Lincoln did set a kind of folksy template for American speechifying. I would venture to guess
some of these like sweeping like you know, like turns of phrase kind of remind me of the Gettysburg Address, like, you know,
it's like plain spoken but swinging for the fences at the same time, kind of
like just Lincoln's rhetoric in general, like. Yeah,
that this land shall not be, kind of like, you know, there's a little bit of a spiritual kind of like that this land shall not perish from the earth and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we're the honest Irishmen.
Like I was thinking of this one from the Lyceum Address. I mean, this is a little bit earlier in like Lincoln's career, but that speech where he says like, "At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide."
Yeah,
it's the same.
Like, there was like a punk
thing
band
of like,
that like
I'm gonna
put
kill
that.
myself. Like it's kind of like, you know, the like Atticus Finch like does emotional blackmail type of like. Yeah, this is like
I'm gonna KMS if you don't live up to our values.
Yeah, it kind of is. Well, yeah, this is like the Kill a Mockingbird, but it's like the Kill a Mining Lord instead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, so I guess, you know, the long arc of Lincoln, even though Gowen was a dirty Democrat, but, you know, I think everyone kind of had to stand Lincoln, I guess, in these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I guess Gowen was a was Gowen a Democrat still at this point?
Oh yeah, his whole life he was a Democrat. Yeah.
So
but
it's
like,
a little bit weird because I feel like it's more of a I think it was
19th century.
Like,
the political parties are like bizarre, especially the Democratic Party in like kind of the Gilded Age, like but before FDR. It's like the most like baffling coalition of people that are just under one ticket.
And they're probably kind of like scrambling to like redefine themselves at this point too. Yeah.
Right, like half the party just got canceled, like for like dissension over slavery,
for treason.
Blocked out for a little while, but then you have these northern machine Democrats that like basically build constituencies among like Irish immigrants and other types of immigrants and like Catholics and stuff, which is like it doesn't even make sense. Like the Southern Democrat bigwigs like have almost like nothing in common with like your like Tammany Hall like boss of like the Irish. Like they're I guess like on certain policies they must. I'm trying to think like what did they agree on besides like we're Democrats. You know what I mean? Like that were they did they have the same position on tariffs or like free silver or other things like that in this post-war period? Or like because I keep seeing like sometimes there are like Republicans that are kind of like Thaddeus Stephen kind of, you know, anti-monopoly like Republicans. But then the Republicans are also definitely the party of like northern big business and like et cetera, et cetera. And then like sometimes there are Democrats that are like populist, like anti-monopoly like Democrats. But then there's like a bunch of like shady machine ones and then like Southern like neo-Confederate types that, you know, like that are definitely not like populist in like an economic sense. It seems like. And so it's and probably like very hostile to labor unions, I would imagine. Like the South kind of always has been. You know, this is the sharecropping, like Jim Crow era. I can't imagine they love unions or anything. But yeah, it's just such an interesting like kind of schizophrenic coalition of people together that like Gowen was a Democrat, but it's like what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like it's like it was he a Democrat because they had a platform that. Like a coherent platform that he like believed in, like the way we think about it today. Probably because like
in order to like be elected to the political position that he had, like you had to be a Democrat. I mean, it was, you know, kind of his whole life, but
well, I mean, he was a businessman. He wasn't. Well, there is mention in this
at one point, didn't he?
Well, he was a district attorney.
He was DA. Yeah.
For local politics, it does seem like Schuylkill County, for example, was dominated by the Democratic Party. Even though, you know, this is in the North and blah, blah, blah. And like, even there was like kind of fighting like intra-Democratic Party in the sense of like the Irish were trying to like get a bigger foothold in the Democratic Party. But then there were these like older Democrats like Franklin Gowen, Benjamin Bannon types that were like old. And
Bannon was like a Whig, right? I think. Or yeah, am I right?
Bannon might have switched to being a Republican because he was a big abolitionist.
He was a Whig, right? Wasn't he?
Oh, I think he was a Whig, but then the Whigs like went out in the 1850s.
And then he became more of a Republican after that.
He became more of a Republican. But then also, I think Cyrus Pershing, the judge of these trials, who had run for governor as a Democrat and, you know, was the judge, the county judge in Schuylkill. You know, he was also a Democrat. Yeah, so it is a strange thing that I don't know. Is that the path back for the Democrats today? Just become like an incoherent coalition of like different interests, and just be like, yeah, we're Democrats. Like, you know, like no, we actually don't have like coherent value. Like that's not the point of the Democratic Party. We're just like a huge vehicle for like interest groups to just.
I mean, I feel like that almost has like already halfway happened
in a way.
And, like. That definitely could be what we see in the future. Like, yeah, I mean, in the last like election, the last big election, like their Democrats' main identity was like that they're not the Republicans. Like,
right.
We kind of like, they're like, we agree with them about everything, more or less, but we're not them.
Like except for the one like the people who are Republicans 5 years ago that are now on our team.
Like a few things. Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. Abortion and like liking immigrants relatively more.
But also like the border must be secured and like it's a huge crisis.
Yeah.
Was definitely part of the message in the last election.
They were leaning into that.
It's hard to think of like I feel like it was mostly like social issues. But like they kind of tried to back away from that a little bit, but they couldn't like fully because it was like really their whole thing. for so long. Yeah, other than abortion.
They did.
It is. Yeah.
Right, which then they just got like an end run done on them, like by the Supreme Court. So, and then like have no plan on like changing anything now. Like, yeah, it's like pretty much, yeah. Democrat, strange political party. Party. And it's like, I don't know how like Gowen
it's weird
got like,
like in the like at this time there was like a huge turnover in terms of like what the dominant parties were, like the Whigs and stuff like that, whereas the Democrats and the Republicans, like their identity has just like shifted dramatically over time. The Democrats almost more so than the Republicans, like in terms of
the Democrats have completely flipped their kind of identity. Yeah, like I mean from the like the Civil War era, like they've completely flipped like to the other side of the spectrum. The Republicans, like, though I guess you could say the Republicans started off like in some respects as like a socially liberal for the time, in that they were like abolitionists, you know, and things like that.
Yeah, they flipped, but like the Democrats, like there's like an intervening period where the Democrats like have gone through like little shifts in strategy. I guess the Republicans kind of have as well, but you know, once they like hooked on to, you know, like the Southern strategy and stuff like that,
the
like,
Dixiecrat defection kind of, but it is, it's funny how like since the fall of the Whigs and the solidifying of the Republican Party, like we can only have those parties now, and they can change, like they can morph, they can even like flip sides, but like they have to be those institutional structures just like are there, and like they're just these like massive like vessels that it's very strange. It's so
insane to have a political party that literally like believes in so little that its entire identity has inverted and is just like pursuing its own or you know, the Republicans really like the exact like constituencies, or like the, you know, the how to put it, the inheritors of those same political concerns and grievances that like led people to like hate the Republicans are now like the grievances that like unite the Republicans, and vice versa, like for the Democrats, like all the, you know, same like states, the same regions of the country that were at one time like staunchly Democratic and would like never forgive the Republicans are now like Republican strongholds.
Right, like the Northern Aggression Party of Abe Lincoln.
I mean, now you like you still like, you know, it's like a routine thing where people are like, oh, the Democrats are the real racists because they're the slavery party. Not to say that they're not racist, but
remember the rally, like, the Glenn Beck rally? We sort of tried to like crash years ago, and then there was a guy wearing like a Democrat is slavery, and he was like, Democrat Party is slavery party, like they made slavery, like it. That was my first time encountering the kind of like just like the smug like idiocy of like the smug ignorance of like some of these people.
Martin
just
Luther
like
King was a communist and a womanizer. He was not a Christian.
He caused riots. He caused riots. He was not a hero.
It was held on Martin Luther King Day, right? And it was like Glenn Beck trying to like somehow.
It was the anniversary of the "I Have a Dream" speech.
Oh yeah.
It was like on the same day.
That so insane. What a different time. You know, like that was like the heyday of the Tea Party. I feel like, you know,
it's like that was like AstroTurf by the Koch brothers, and it was like Glenn Beck was like this Alex Jones light kind of agitator, like first person to like really invoke like Soros and like stuff in like mainstream media, and like really kicked off that era, like a proto MAGA era, and all of those people are like definitely the people that like 5 years later would just be like, fuck yeah, Trump. Like it was that type of like Americans that would come in that, but it was weird at the time that they were so pissed, but it was all about like kind of culture war. Like it was this kind of like cultural Marxism, like Obama's a communist, like weird, and like a lot, but there was a lot of like racism undertone, and like weird little libertarian like Charlie Kirk guys like walking around.
Yeah, we talked to some of those people, and they all accused us of being members of Students for a Democratic Society.
Or I think just straight DNC. Like, I mean, to be fair, I wasn't as like, I wasn't as like Marx pilled and woke back then.
I mean, that like didn't even come up, like, because it was like, operating on the level of like Obamacare, like gives you the right to like kill a 3-year-old baby or something. Like,
that's right. That's what everyone was fighting about back then. No, it was very stupid. Then those people, they won.
They certainly,
I guess
they
you could
certainly
see
won, but
both parties in a way like metabolized and sort of tamed and incorporated the more like rebellious tendencies in their coalition throughout the 20th century. You could see that with like the Republican Party ended up absorbing like the Dixiecrat Southern, like, you know, anti-integration, like the reactionary Southern kind of like constituency, and like blending it in to like the broader Republican, like pro-business, like kind of coalition that like the Republicans have historically had. And then the Democratic Party kind of doing the same thing with like the radical left currents and stuff, like bringing them in and kind of like defanging them. Though I'd say like with the Republican side, because they're doing that with reactionaries, like they kind of like gave more, they like let the reactionaries like be involved more in the running of the Republican Party and like the setting of the agenda and stuff like that. Then on the Democratic side, where it's like, oh, we're really just incorporating you to like neutralize you and like make sure that you're like not gonna, you know, primary us or whatever.
Yeah.
So that like Nancy Pelosi is like the farthest left alternative that actually exists. So
yeah,
in a way,
but
they both had to metabolize both those things. Like,
but yeah, I mean, that's my point, though. It's like so crazy that like it is still technically the Democratic Party, even though its identity has completely transformed. Like, if you look at like a map of the country and like you think about like the actual like political alignment of the parties, like even despite the like Democrat Party equals slavery party, which like is true. Like
you're right,
now,
in a way,
now like anyone who like believes that slavery is good and like, you know, supports the Confederacy or like, you know, thinks it was a shame that the Confederacy was defeated would never vote for Democrats.
Oh,
you
never,
know, unless
never.
like they were the most hardcore person ever and like it was just a completely irrational thing where they're like Lincoln was a Republican, like I just don't trust them, it's all a psyop. Like,
all right,
there's probably like one guy like that. You know,
I have a harebrained theory. I'm just going to fire this off, that what we're dealing with today is actually the crypto wigification of our entire political system, in that both the parties in a way they're all wigs. Okay, hear me out. And you know what? There's an interesting like parallel or precedent to this, where for like the majority of its history, our cousin nation Liberia, you know, which was modeled after great American democracy, blah blah blah, and had this kind of, you know, feudal, kind of a semi-feudal system going on. They had one party, the true Whig Party, you know, until like the CIA overthrew it. But if you think about us having like a Whig Party, because the big split with the Whigs in the 1850s was over like abolitionist Whigs. So you can think about this as woke Whigs, but still like northern elitist, like, but like with more socially progressive, you know, ideas about this and that. And then you had like the kind of like more stuffy conservative, like pro-business Whigs that like didn't really care about slavery, or maybe even thought it was like fine, or like just didn't like, was not going to expend any political capital, like, you know, getting in a fight over it and whatever. And you can almost see today's Republican Party is those Whigs, like the not super like not super anti-slavery faction of the Whigs, and the old Dixie Democrats have like combined to like form a coalition. And then you have like the progressive Whigs are like the Democratic Party. Honestly, the modern Democratic Party has Whig vibes in a lot of ways. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, definitely.
And it's sort of elite, like the upper echelon elite thing. But it also kind of has this, it has another part of the Democratic coalition. It has like the immigrant part of like the Democratic coalition that like I guess did exist by like the Civil War or whatever, you know, like the machine, like the shady machine political thing, which like eventually was extended to like minority constituencies like in the early 20th century. And that's how like most, you know, black communities or whatever like end up, you know, largely voting for like Democrat, and like in cities with large African-American populations, et cetera, like you'll have just like how you had with like the Irish or the Italians or whatever, like you have these sort of like ethnically boundaried like political machine sort of things, and then you have these like progressive Whigs that are like kind of like rule the top of the party, and like kind of like, you know, your Pelosi's, Pritzkers, like all those kind of people, Obama, Clintons, etc. I don't know. I never thought about that before right now, but in a way it's like
I don't think you're the first person to suggest that either. Like,
probably
I think
not.
like
probably not.
Some people kind of use like wig as like a synonym for like liberal in the broad sense. Sometimes I feel like, the idea of like
a classical
progressivism as like a broader ideology where everything is like viewed as a teleological movement towards like the best state of affairs yet, which is the present, and like the future is like always on, so I feel like that tendency does exist in both parties. I mean, I do feel like the Whigs were a little bit had more of like a libertarian streak than I feel like that's something that like has disappeared like weirdly from both parties. Is like, I guess it just depends on who's in power. Like when the other side is in power, then maybe you'll see it a little bit emerge. But
I feel I mean, there also is like as America expanded and gobbled up, stole more territory, whatever. You have kind of these like prairie populist kind of things going on, like the Grange movement and things like that, and like William Jennings Bryan, who was a Democrat, but like kind of like stirring things up. And then you can see it with like kind of like Ron Paul libertarianism. I do think though, like the pro-business Whigs, I think about like, I don't know, like the Mellons and like the Koch brothers or whatever, like people that instinctively believe in like laissez-faire economics and like private property and things like that, but might be more like socially like they're not like evangelical, like Bible thumping, whatever. They might support like the Koch brothers, I guess, would support some of that. But like really they want you to like believe in the Chicago school or something, like they want you to believe in like Milton Friedman or something. They're kind of like, it's like a secularized but deeply held belief in like the power of like, markets and business to like elevate, it's a very like Northern Protestant kind of.
I guess. Yeah, let me correct myself. It's the British Whigs that people are referring to when they talk about like Whig historiography, I guess.
Okay.
It's the, so it's a little bit different. I don't really know what the relationship is between the British Whigs and the American Whigs, honestly. Like, I assume that might have originated as like a political attack, like, and not something that they adopted on their own, but I don't really know for sure, honestly.
No, I mean, I think they were the Whig Party. Like they definitely embraced the name.
I feel like they might have embraced it, but it might have like kind of like the Democratic symbol of
like
the
Yankee
donkey.
Doodle Dandy.
Yeah, or the donkey, the Democratic donkey, which was like because someone called Andrew Jackson a jackass, I think. I don't know if that's an apocryphal story, but that's what I've heard.
In some way, Democrats have never changed. That's like something like a lib would like put on.
Sure,
it's like, oh, you called
nasty
like
woman. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
but I guess everyone does that. It's like, oh, proud, deplorable,
Right. Oh, you go to Las Vegas or most of the gas stations in this country, and you will find just like so much like, yeah, that's right. Like, I'm deplorable. and like just weird ass like aggro shirts like that. Like, there's entire Trump stores in Las Vegas now off the strip where you can just get your Trump merch, and it's like they love like the prison shot and like the prison photo.
Oh my god, that's so bizarre.
It's like next to like shirts of like Tupac. It's just like Trump. Like
what the,
it's so strange. It's so strange. And AI generated shirts now.
I can't deal with this. I just can't. Like I'm just getting too old, and like now I just like I've reached that point of like I used to be with it, but now it is scary to me. like I don't like the direction that the society's going at all. Like I'm starting to think like, oh damn, this is really getting off the rails.
Yeah, I think I don't trust anything with the tariffs, but maybe the slop T-shirt economy is going to get like hit. But slop apparel is going to be. There's too many themed. Too many.
I mean, that's only a symptom of a larger problem.
It really is.
That's
not
really the issue. Like having a slop T-shirt.
But there is a sense like standing around in these stores about like a tidal wave is coming. Like it's gonna wash all this horror away. But then something even worse is gonna replace it probably. I just imagine like Americans having to make like 500 different versions of like a Las Vegas shirt.
Oh my god!
Sell. It's
like in a concentration camp in like a Palestinified Central America, like in one of like Bukele's prisons, like just like thousands and thousands of people, just
escape from New York,
painstakingly stitching together like AI slop, like Trump lion T-shirt, like. Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah. Well, yeah.
If you wanna picture the future, imagine like a Trump like lion rhinestone boot stamping on a human face.
Yeah, like Liberace Trump. Like oh my god. We're just circling the drain of the skibbity toilet.
Yeah. Yes, we definitely are.
Yeah, that was a little interlude there. Yeah, maybe we'll do a wig episode. That'd be actually kind of funny.
I mean, there's so many topics that I want to do. We really, at least we're never going to run out of things to talk about.
No, we won't.
Is your survival captive?
Still in the middle. We're not done with Gowen's fucking his bender. Let's see. He was in the middle of saying who was a good Irish and a bad Irish. That's right. That you're not a true Irishman if you support Molly Maguireism, etc. So the author goes on to say that these men were being persecuted for their religion was sublime impudence, he asserted, since they had been excommunicated by their church. The Archbishop himself had fully known of the detective's mission. Here Gowen paused to preach the tolerance his father had taught him. This is scary father that used to chase people off his doorstep with a shotgun, right? His crazy Irish Protestant father. Yeah, James Gowen, I think. So, yeah, he preached the tolerance his father had taught him. The Irish or the Catholics should not be blamed for the acts of this order. Quote, do not forget that whatever little credit may be due to him who has conceived the plan of exposing this association, he said with becoming modesty, is due to one who is the son of an Irishman. Moreover, the man who had carried out the investigation was an Irishman by birth and a Catholic by religion. Gowen described what conditions had been like, quote, and now let us look to society in this county, as it was 3 months ago, when men retired to their homes at 8 or 9 in the evening, and no one ventured beyond the precincts of his own door, when every man engaged in any enterprise of magnitude or connected with industrial pursuits left his home in the morning with his hand upon his pistol, unknowing whether he would again return alive, when the very foundations of society were threatened. The audience, and this is the real, I brought this, I think I mentioned this last time, but this is the real banger, manipulative and bad, but over-the-top moment. The audience might have been startled at these words, since none of them could remember such a state of affairs, but their attention was riveted too quickly by his next move. Throwing down the gauntlet, he boldly dared the Mollies to assassinate him. Quote, is there a man in this audience, he asked, looking at me now and hearing me denounce this association, who longs to point his pistol at me? I tell him that he has as good a chance here as he will ever have again. Wow, okay. So just, shoot me down. He's telling the truth. Reverting for the moment to the case he was supposed to be discussing, he demonstrated that McParlan's testimony had been corroborated by other witnesses and that the failure of persons who had seen the crime to identify Munley was meaningless. McParlan's testimony reminded him how he had felt when it became possible for the detective to appear as a witness. Quote, "Then I saw that some miraculous interposition of Providence had been vouchsafed to permit us to use the testimony and the knowledge of this man, McParlan. Then I breathed freer and trod with elate step. Then I knew that I had within my hands the power to crush these villains. Then, and on the day when he took his place upon the witness stand, I took my seat at the table as counsel for the Commonwealth, and the warrants were executed which consigned to the prison every one of these criminals, with the exception of one or two, and of those who had run away when Jimmy Kerrigan turned state's evidence. When, in all the history of criminal jurisprudence, did ever such a change of society come over a county as that which came over this county on the morning that McParlan first became a witness, and on the morning when Jack Kehoe, the county delegate, with 12 or 15 other men, handcuffed to a chain, were marched from the high places they had occupied to take their solitary cells as felons within the walls of your prison? Then we knew we were free men. Then we cared no longer for the Molly Maguires. Then we could go to Patsy Collins, the commissioner of this county, and say to him, build well the walls of the new addition of the prison. Dig the foundations deep and make them strong. Put in good masonry and iron bars, for, as the Lord liveth, the time will come when, side by side with William Love, the murderer of Squire Gwyther, you will enter the walls that you are now building for others." Damn, okay. Patsy Collins called out. Then we could say to Jack Kehoe, the high constable of a great borough in this county, we have no fear of you. Then we could say to Ned Monahan, chief of police and murderer and assassin, behind you the scaffold is prepared for your reception. Then we could say to Pat Conry, commissioner of this county, the time has ceased when a governor of this state dares to pardon a Molly Maguire. You have had your last pardon. Then we could say to John Slattery, who was almost elected judge of this court, we know of you that it were better you had not been born than that it should be known. It's confusing sentence. I don't know what that means. Then all of us looked up. Then at last we were free. And I came to this county and walked through it as safely as in the most crowded thoroughfares of Philadelphia. That's funny. The spellbound listeners did not pause to recall that Gowen had walked through the streets of Pottsville thousands of times before May 6th with equal safety. Their ears were intent as he took up the charge that this trial was the old story of capital against labor. Quote, he goes, this is wild. "I now stand here on behalf of the laboring people of this county, the people who have suffered more throughout the length and breadth of this land by the actions of these men than any other. I stand here to protest, with all the power that God has given me, against the monstrous assumption that these villains are the representatives of the laboring people of Schuylkill County. 200 or 300 assassins have given a name to the whole people of this county, and now, when they are put upon trial for murder, they say it is the old story of capital against labor. On every occasion in which I had to take any public part in the conflicts between capital and labor, I have taken pains to assert my belief that the laboring people of this county were as upright, as honest, as law-abiding, and as moral as those of any other community in the state. I took the pains to show that there was a secret association banded together for the purpose of committing outrages which had given a notorious character not only to the laboring people of the county, but of the whole county itself." Telling the jury how he had buckled on his harness for this glorious crusade, he moved on into his peroration. "My friend, Mr. Lavelle, makes a plea to you for mercy. He pleads to you for the mother and the wife of this prisoner, and he asks you to let mercy into your hearts, and to restore this prisoner to his home. Are there no others who plead for mercy? Have I no clients asking mercy at your hands? Why is this young woman made a widow in the early morning of her life? What crime had her husband committed that he was shot down like a dog? Oh, she pleads to you for mercy more eloquently, even if more silently, than anyone on behalf of the family of this prisoner. I plead to you on behalf of the whole people of this county. I plead for mercy on behalf of the whole people of this state, on behalf of the orphans, the fatherless, and the widows, whose protectors have been stricken down before you. I plead to you for mercy. I invoke the spirits of the dead and ask them silently to pass before you in this courthouse. I invoke the spirits of Dunn, of Little Hales, of Muir, of Smith, of Ray, and the many victims of this foul conspiracy to aid me in pleading for mercy. I ask you to listen to the cries of the wounded, to the shrieks of the dying, and the mournful funereal wailings over the bodies of the dead. If I close my eyes, I hear voices against which you cannot close your ears, and which are pleading for mercy. Oh, so strongly that my poor words are but as the empty air. Oh, gentlemen, I beg to you for mercy, but to this prisoner let it be such mercy as the father, whose slaughtered infant lies beside him, gives to the wolf that has mangled the corpse. Such mercy as the seed of the woman bestows upon the serpent whose head is crushed beneath its heel. And when you yield such mercy to assassins such as these, you yield a mercy and grant a protection to society at large, which looks to you now as its only refuge.
It's crazy to think that, like, of a jury being like, yeah, like, this is fire, like, this is so persuasive, like, instead of just being like, shut the fuck up, like,
yeah, I know.
talk about the case. Like,
people, they're just like, no, just like way up. For 3 hours, the crowd, which filled every available space in the courtroom, had been following his words with breathless interest. His matchless voice, backed by the enthusiasm of his sincere belief that he was leading a crusade for justice, had carried his listeners away. Still under his spell, the jury came back within an hour with a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. The speech was printed in pamphlet form and thousands of copies sold. There you go. There you go. I mean, he mic dropped, he Eminem ciphered the shit out of this trial.
I guess so. Yeah.
Wow, people loved it. Like he was very famous for giving at the Philadelphia Music Hall, giving these like 4-hour speeches. Like he was in a way kind of the original podcast bro. Like doing a long form Joe Rogan length.
That day, like how much like entertainment did you realize? Like most of it probably was like slop in the same way, although it was like in different media. So like, you know, in the same way that people like, you know, were go nuts over like the White Lotus or whatever. Like probably like getting to hear like some soaring rhetoric. Probably
right. You didn't have Aaron Sorkin TV shows or even plays really. Yeah. So you know, vaudeville was too like goofy. So vaudeville is like Mr. Beast videos, you know. And
it was true. It was before like the rise of theatrical modernism. So most of like the plays you would see, would be like
not realistic.
Yeah, there would be like, you know, just like a slapstick routine, like mocking Irish people, or like you know, like a vaudeville like review show, like the Follies or something like that. Like even that is a little bit early, but like. Yeah. So
you
like, there's no
like
Clifford Odets yet. Yeah.
You wrote a good vaudeville scene in the Molly Maguire's pilot. The Pottsville Patty Whackers singing their song "Me Last Potato,"
which is like that's a real song. That was a real like music hall like parody song of like an Irish man like crying over his how he loves his last potato. Yeah, it was like to the tune of "The Last Rose of Summer," and it's like an Irish man like wailing over how he has to eat his last potato, which he loves because he's so hungry. And it was like mocking Irish people for starving. And that was like a real like popular American music hall song. So there you go.
Incredible.
Just a glimpse into what you had at the time. Yeah.
That was good. Good work there. Good historical fiction work. Yeah. Which causes a race riot, which then I think McParlan uses that opportunity to jump on stage and start punching the people singing the song to like prove that he's badass. To, the other Molly Maguires or something like that and get arrested.
Yeah. He starts like a riot.
Yeah. He starts a fight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is just a banger. Like everyone just like loves this. Then like more trials start to happen, and then Jack Kehoe is brought into court a few weeks later, charged with assault and battery with intent to kill Bully Bill Thomas. But the other two defendants, Tom Hurley and Mike Doyle, had made good their escape. It was kind of haunting that, you know, they brought up like Tom Hurley escaping, and then Gowen said something like, they can run away. They can run away to the Rocky Mountains. It doesn't matter. We're going to get them. And then like Tom Hurley was the guy who was caught in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains years later. And he's the guy where they're like, where McKenna, the man you know as McKenna, is coming back to get you and bring you back. And then he slit his throat and said, Mac will never get me alive. And then, and then he killed himself. Yeah, that's Tom Hurley. So he escaped, but not forever. The other guys, though, some of them definitely escaped forever. Like, I don't know if like Like Friday O'Donnell with that great name. I don't like who knows where he ended up. I forget if he was killed. He might have been killed in like a gunfight or something like out west, or I don't know, like or executed for an unrelated thing.
Yeah, but, I remember that happened to somebody. They were caught over something unrelated.
And a couple of these books do note that like a cousin of the O'Donnell clan, of that family, Jack Kehoe's in-laws, assassinated like a British official on like a steamliner like some years after this, like in somewhere in the decade after this, and then he was arrested and hanged for it. And there was like evidence to suggest that he had spent some time in America and even in like Pennsylvania, and might have like lived with his cousins for a while at Wiggins Patch. And this guy was connected to, I forget which order it was, but it was kind of a neo-ribbon men, like Irish society that was like fighting against like British occupation and shit. So like there's some like interesting evidence that the O'Donnells were like had kind of like connected on both sides of the Atlantic with underground struggles and things like that. But anyways, a bunch of other people basically get indicted, and McParlan is again the chief witness. Oh yeah, they flip one of the defendants, Francis McHugh, and get him to testify on stand in hopes of lightening his sentence. And he sort of corroborates McParlan's general story. And then another sensation was the appearance of the warden of the county jail. He was brought in solely to report that Kehoe, while in prison, has said to him, quote, "If we don't get justice, I don't think the old man in Harrisburg will go back on us." This implication that Governor Hartranft would pardon the Mollies caused astonishment in the courtroom, although it had been well known in Schuylkill County the previous fall that certain Irish leaders, including Kehoe, had made a deal with the Republicans to support their candidate for governor against Judge Pershing, who was residing over this trial and lost the election, and that an embezzling Irish county commissioner had already been pardoned, along with his two Pennsylvania Dutch colleagues. The defense objected that this testimony had nothing to do with the case, but Gowen maintained that it was a tacit admission of Kehoe's guilt. His real purpose in getting it into the record, of course, was to make it politically impossible for any of the convicted Hibernians to obtain pardons from Governor Hartranft, which actually does, like, work. Like, it's pretty fucked up, but, like, kind of is effective. Because he's like, oh no, I can't be seen as like supporting these evil terrorists, these evil Irish terrorists. Like, I can't. They're kind of doing like an MS-13 like thing with a lot of this like stuff too, of like we're actually like standing up for the working people against these thugs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they brought in some witnesses back and forth. Some of them contradict each other, but now this time Gowen was the first to address the jury. He told them that they were trying the Order of Hibernians for its life. Going entirely beyond the evidence in this or any other case that was to be tried, he charged the society with what a later generation was to call racketeering, declaring its purpose, quote, was to get the benefit of and use and enjoy the property of others without owning it and without paying for it. The purpose was to make the business of mining coal in this county a terror and a fear, to secure for the leading men in this society profitable positions and the control of large operations at every colliery. The purpose was to levy blackmail upon every man engaged in industrial pursuits in this county, so that the owners, under the terror which this organization had acquired, would gladly purchase peace and immunity by having one or two or more of these men in prominent positions at every colliery, and employ as many of their confederates, members of this organization, as possible to protect their property from the villainy of their own, capital O, order. Wow, okay. So this is interesting. In referring to the alleged discrepancies between McParlan's and McHugh's testimony, he asserted that that was the very sign of its truth, citing the differences between the four Gospels as an example. That's a funny thing to invoke. Yeah. He said he averred that he had tried to protect the lives of the Molly assassins from the vigilantes because he wanted them tried in court, and reminded the jury that the prisoners were likely to be lynched if acquitted. Debatable, but okay. The speech failed to reach the heights of his brilliant masterpiece in the Munley case, but oratory was no longer needed. Although the defense pleaded with the jury not to be swayed by the excited state of public opinion, a verdict of guilty was returned in 20 minutes, with a recommendation of mercy for Frank McHugh. Fortunately for the defendants, Bully Bill had survived the erratic aim of his assassins, and the worst sentence they could receive was 7 years in jail. Gowen and his cohorts were not yet finished with them, however. All the defendants except Morris and Gibbons were promptly brought back and tried all over again for conspiracy to murder the Majors. The preceding trial was repeated over the protest of the defense attorneys that this was part of the conspiracy for which the prisoners had already been convicted. The only variation was that Jimmy Kerrigan, by virtue of having been one of the party assigned to shoot the Major brothers, was this time able to appear on the stand and enjoy another bask in the limelight of publicity. The return of the jury's verdict permitted the court to add 7 more years to the defendants' terms. Yeah, so then they just keep racking on charges and years on these guys to beef up their sentences. Another guy flips and is denounced as a squealer. This is a Pat Butler, also squeals, and Pat's parents denounced him as a squealer, and the indignant contributors to his relief fund demanded their money back. And then the final act of this is basically Blackjack Kehoe, right? They basically broken this entire organization. Let's see, the Thomas Duffy trial was next. Thomas Duffy one, there's very thin evidence, basically. McParlan couldn't even really give direct evidence, and even the vindictive Shenandoah Herald conceded an acquittal was expected, but the jury brought in a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. Ned Monahan, the former chief constable, just for being at that meeting while he was testifying in that other trial, was easy to convict. Yeah, all these other people were, convicted. Muff Lawler turned informer. Second trial convicted him. Charles McAllister, blah, blah, blah. So James McAllister, was the one who fled the Wiggins Patch massacre. Charles, his brother, was brought in and charged with the murder, but McParlan realized that he got a good look at him for the first time and discovered that the Sanger and urine shooter was James, who had run away. But Charles still got prosecuted, was shooting James Riles in Shenandoah. The only evidence against him was an identification by Mrs. Riles, who might have easily mistaken him for his brother, even though his mother-in-law testified that he'd been at home. I guess that would be Jack Kehoe's mother-in-law, I guess. He was convicted, but then later got a new trial and was eventually acquitted. The Morgan Powell murder was solved. Yellow Jack Donahue. Let's see, Slattery. Here we go. All right. So then they go back to what we talked about in part 1, which is the murder of Frank Langdon during the Civil War, that some people basically mumbled Jack Kehoe was responsible for it, though it's incredibly nebulous. There's not very strong evidence that he did it. So they say that the case against Kehoe was the most important since the prosecution was anxious to put a rope around his neck, both because of his prominence and because of his alleged plot to kill McParlan. There was serious doubt that he'd actually taken part in the beating of Langdon. One witness, George Beck, testified that as a boy, he had gone to the saloon to get his father and had seen Kehoe there while Langdon was being attacked outside. The prosecution promptly brought a number of persons from Shenandoah to prove that Beck had a worthless reputation, he was basically a liar. Let's see. Oh, yeah, somebody else. One other witness said 3 weeks before the fatal assault, Kehoe, in a drunken quarrel with Langdon, had declared, "You son of a bitch, I'll kill you before long, for you're only robbing the people here by your docking." Those words alone were sufficient to hang the Girardville man, since they implied an intention to murder and enabled the jury to bring in a first-degree verdict. Damn. That happens, and then they frame a bunch of people for killing Alexander Ray, the failed stagecoach robbery in, I think, 1868. They get Kelly the Bum to just, make up, basically, he saved his own neck by confessing and implicates a bunch of Mollies. So then finally, the hangings finally begin on, what was the other book that said?
Sons of Molly Maguire.
Sons of Molly Maguire mentioned that June 21st, 1877 was the first execution day for some of these Mollies. And I think the book notes that the hangings resembled some kind of pagan sacrifice because it was so sufficiently close to the summer solstice, right?
I don't remember that exact line.
Let me see. I think it was on 283.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. The hangings have begun in spectacular fashion. 10 men went to the gallows on June 21st, 1877. A date close enough to the summer solstice to suggest some kind of a pagan sacrifice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Black Thursday, or the day of the rope, as it was called.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which I think now is a fascist thing. Fascist.
You hear that often. Yeah.
Right. So we were talking about Black Thursday. And
the day of the rope,
which itself was a kind of dramatic production by the state, the symbolism that was employed. They got somebody to come in to Pottsville and build like these
this,
huge gallows, right?
Yeah, the description of this in this book is like really brutal. Yeah.
In which book? The
Sons of Molly Maguire.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's a really like he writes officials in Schuylkill and Carbon counties turned over much of the task of prosecuting the Molly Maguires to the Reading Railroad and other major coal companies. Gowen himself served as one of the lead prosecutors, and the first big trial for the Jones slaying the state's evidence was presented by none other than that old Civil War scourge of the Buckshots and Mollies, Charles Albright, who is now a lawyer for the Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company. You know, he goes on.
By the way, I think all these books mention that. I think maybe when he first shows up in like full Civil War like uniform, like decorated uniform, like
sword.
Civil War. Yeah. Like they really made it like this is a struggle for the soul of America. You know, like he's a patriot, etc.
Yeah, the Francis Hughes, the Schuylkill County Democratic leader during the war, he served in the prosecution. And and Judge Pershing, was the Democratic candidate for governor in 1875, whom Kehoe had worked so hard against. Yeah, he writes, in fact, the great Molly Maguire trials of the 1870s allowed the coal establishment to finally lay to rest the bitter partisan feuds that had riven it during the Civil War era, giving rise to secret society violence. In effect, the leaders of the two parties buried the hatchet deep in the flesh of the Molly Maguires. Doyle, Kelly, and Campbell were convicted and sentenced to death in the Jones murder, as was Thomas Munley, a Gilberton Hibernian, in the Sanger urine killings. The coal establishment, smelling blood, pressed on with a frenzy of arrests and trials. When the railroads wrapped up the cases stemming from the post-strike wave of violence, they moved on to the older cases from the Civil War era, sometimes because new evidence had emerged, and sometimes because the cases offered a convenient excuse to hang an inconvenient Irishman. The murder trial of Jack Kehoe fell into the latter category. Kehoe had already been convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison in assault and conspiracy trials. But Gowen was not satisfied, so he dredged up the 1862 death of Frank Langdon, the Auden Reed mine foreman. Right. The crime was 15 years old and probably did not rise to the level of first-degree murder. Langdon had been beaten with sticks and stones on a booze-soaked summer Saturday, which hardly suggested malice aforethought, and his inept doctor may have been as responsible as anyone for his death. This was also considerable doubt. There was also considerable doubt that Kehoe was even at the scene of the beating. But the prosecutors, who included Gowen and Albright, saw the trial as a way to eliminate Kehoe once and for all, and to link the Molly Maguires to the labor movement. Albright asked James Shovelin, the defense witness at the miners' union for which he was a secretary in 1862, was known as the Buckshots, a synonym for the Mollies. The coal operators put that name on the union then, he replied. Then Albright asked him if Kehoe had been in the union. He must have been. He was a miner. So
he was found guilty in January 1877, and Judge Pershing sentenced him to hang.
Yeah, right. His enemy, who was the judge, who had campaigned against, sentenced him to hang. In the Miners' Journal reported the verdict. It carried a one-paragraph item that another Molly convicted of murder, Yellow Jack Donahue, had confessed to killing Langdon. Donahue reported that for a long while he was haunted by the murdered man and had to go to New York to get the spell removed.
That was in our pilot. That was in our pilot.
Yeah, that he was obsessed with fairies and paranoid.
He was paranoid about fairies, and he was haunted by the soul of a man that he had accidentally killed during the Civil War. Yeah, Yellow Jack. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, the echoes of the Molly Maguire ballad in which the murdered belle comes back to haunt his killer. No.
Yeah.
He also does note in the footnote here that McParlan seemed right on the border of perjury, if not over it, when he asked, prior to your joining the AOH, did you have any knowledge of the organization? And he said, I did not. I had no knowledge, only what I gathered up throughout the county, replied the detective whose 7-page report to Pinkerton, which we read, I think, written before he ever entered the anthracite region, had specifically linked the AOH to the Mollies. Yeah, we read that in the Pinkerton book. It was maybe they said in Sons of Molly Maguire, he submitted this long detailed thing to him. So, basically lying. So now that the hangings, they say here, the hangings had begun in a spectacular fashion. 10 men went to the gallows on June 21st, 1877, right? A date close enough to the summer solstice to suggest some kind of pagan sacrifice. On Black Thursday, the day of the rope, as it came to be called, Campbell, Doyle, Kelly, and Yellow Jack Donahue were hanged in Mock Chunk, and Munley, James Rorty, Hugh McGeehan, Thomas Duffy, James Carroll, and James Boyle in Pottsville. It was the largest mass hanging in the history of the Commonwealth, but it did nothing to stem the tide of industrial strife. In fact, it only contributed, as Reading coal and iron officials acknowledged. Yeah. So they're really crushed after that. I guess one worker said there was general uneasiness at all the collieries where there are Irish workmen. Henry Pleasance reported the day before the hangings, there will be little or no work tomorrow. A week later, he wrote of a universal feeling of restlessness among the miners. Quote, the Irish are very poor, and having given their last dollar toward the defense and burial of the Mollies, are left without enough to eat, he wrote. They blame our company for the hanging of innocent men, and their hatred for our company is very great at present. Their hatred, in fact, was so great that it trumped their hunger. Their hatred, in fact, was so great that it trumped their hunger. In an 8-day period from June 20th to June 27th, strikes had crippled the Elmwood, Ellengowan, Knickerbocker, Mahanoy City, North Mahanoy, and Shenandoah collieries.
Yeah, there was like mass unrest.
Then in a weird way, coincidentally, like lining up with this, not directly caused by it because this is a much bigger event, but just weeks after this first wave of hangings, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 erupts, and it starts like spreading. It's really, I think, the first kind of nationwide labor insurrection that we can really point to in American history, of where the shutdowns start. They start in the Northeast, but then gradually spread. And they do spread to Schuylkill County. Yeah, from Baltimore. Let's see, just this paragraph here, because it is fascinating. In the weeks after the hangings, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 erupted, and the miners of Summit Hill, Campbell's hometown, joined in, carrying bread on poles. It was a bit of symbolic protest that had boded ill for landlords during the agony of the famine years in the Ulster borderlands, and it proved a reliable barometer of the depth of feelings in the newest crisis. Amid gunfire and flames, the railroad strike spread from Baltimore to Scranton, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and San Francisco in the bloodiest class conflict the nation had ever known. In an echo of the Wiggins Patch killings, a vigilance committee in Scranton killed 2 Irishmen when it opened fire on a crowd of strikers on August 2nd, trying to quell what a New York Times headline labeled the Working Men's War. Efforts to arrest the killers were blocked by a National Guard unit, and then the vigilantes became a National Guard unit. Newspapers and state officials justified the killings by claiming the victims were, quote, filled with the spirit of Molly Maguire, or by suggesting they may have actually been Mollies. So there were attempts like in Schuylkill to kind of like join up with this kind of thing. It says a group of men and boys who marched into Mahanoy City to quite literally drum up a strike were promptly dispersed by a posse, and their leaders were arrested. The forces of law and order were determined to avoid a repeat of the drubbing they'd received just 2 years earlier at the hands of Kehoe and his followers. When the authorities finished breaking what came to be known as the Great Strike, the railroads and the Commonwealth returned to the task at hand, hanging Irish miners. Damn. So yeah, for them, I think the other books like say that maybe like almost ironically, Schuylkill County does not erupt, despite all these like, you know, this kind of borderline war that's already going on there. Maybe because the presence with the trials, there's like so many police, so many Pinkertons, like so many coal and iron people there, and all the leaders and, you know, figureheads that like would have resisted were all like literally being hanged or were in jail at that point. So it was like kind of an anomalous thing where the Scranton area, like the upper anthracite region, which had been more docile and less prone to like strikes and kind of labor radicalism, like during the Molly period, started popping off. And then they had some very like Molly-esque moments where, they started shooting into crowds and things really spiraled out of control. Some of the militia units like were too sympathetic to the striking workers, and so they had to bring in like outside people to like crush it, and it was a big deal. But it eventually does die down, and Kehoe is like goes through a lot of efforts to try to get a pardon or to be like have his sentence commuted so he doesn't have to be hanged. It says that like we mentioned, to prevent Governor Hartranft from pardoning Kehoe, Gowen introduced testimony that he would do just that, forcing a denial from the governor. In a jailhouse interview, Kehoe delivered a bitter condemnation of Gowen as a man whose, quote, whole course as president of the Reading Road has shown him to be a man of restless, arbitrary ambition, with such grasping tendencies that no obstacle, however sacred, was ever allowed to interpose between him and his end. He accused Gowen of destroying the prosperity of the region by striving for a monopoly financed by British gold, subverting the legislature, buying out or bullying the independent coal operators, and destroying the Working Men's Benevolent Association. I believe he started out with the intention of breaking up our organization as soon as he bought the mines, Kehoe said. He broke the labor union first. Of course, he was aware of this Hibernian society, and he was afraid that they would kill him because he deserved to be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I live Jack Kehoe. Like critical support.
Yeah.
Honestly, like. Damn, he kind of didn't give a fuck. But to the end, Kehoe maintained his innocence in the Langdon case. Standing on the scaffold in Pottsville on a snowy December 18th, 1878, he reasserted it one last time. Quote, I am not guilty of the murder of Langdon, he said in a clear, loud voice. I never saw the crime committed. I knew nothing of it. Then, when the trap was sprung, but the fall did not break his neck, Kehoe, once the High Constable of Gerardville, died slowly of strangulation, the rope gashing his face in his death throes. And this is actually just the final execution. This is a pretty fucked up execution. Of all the botched, ugly execution spectacles, none were quite as bad as the two that followed Kehoe's. James McDonnell and Charles Sharp had been convicted in the Civil War-era slaying of Mine Superintendent George K. Smith. It was the Molly murder with the strongest overtones of old-world mummery, committed within days of Halloween by men who invaded the Smith home in costume or disguise. They had been scheduled to die on the same day as the Schuylkill County delegate, but their lawyers had won a reprieve until January 14, 1879. They sought a second reprieve in Harrisburg the day before the executions to allow a review of the case by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. The governor promised a decision the next morning. The execution was scheduled to take place between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. At 10:25, the sheriff knocked on the doors of the condemned men's cells to let them know it was time. At 10:30, the governor decided to grant the reprieves, and at 10:37, the news was received at the Mock Chunk Telegraph office. A telegraph messenger dashed off to the prison, where Sharp and McDonnell were by now making their last statements, both proclaiming their innocence in the death of Smith, though McDonnell acknowledged his guilt in another killing. The two kissed crucifixes as priests whispered words of consolation. White caps were drawn over their heads. At the door to the prison, where McDonnell's wife and children were weeping loudly, the telegraph messenger rang for admittance, only to be ignored, probably on the assumption that he was a distraught relative. 30 seconds later, McDonnell and Sharp dropped into eternity. The former died instantly, but the latter struggled violently. In the hush that accompanied his death throes, the ringing of a bell was heard, and the breathless messenger was let in with his news, half a minute too late. Bedlam that's fucked
absolutely
up.
Crazy, yeah.
Bedlam ensued, apparently. McDonnell's brother, standing at the foot of the gallows where his brother still twisted, shouted, "This is murder. They're hanging two innocent men, and their murderers are in this crowd." The sheriff, instead of cutting down the wrongly hanged, took the time to inform the crowd of the contents of the telegraph. "Gentlemen," he announced, "this is a dispatch reprieving the two men till Monday the 20th. It is marked received at the post office at 10:30, by the time he was done, Sharp had stopped struggling. The sheriff turned toward the swaying bodies and said, "I am as sorry as anyone. It is too late to be helped. Where is the undertaker?" In response came more loud allegations of murder from relatives of the dead men, who accused the sheriff of hastening the executions because he knew a reprieve was at hand. The sheriff tried to shift blame for the timing of the execution to the priests. "I did not name the hour," he said. "To Father Bunce, I said that when he was ready, the execution should go on. He could have stayed with the men, praying with them till 2 o'clock, had he chosen to do so." That nearly prompted a riot amid the agitated observers, but Father Bunce acted quickly to defuse the situation. "It was I who told him the men were ready," he told the crowd. "Stand back, I say, and be silent." The crowd obeyed. The New York Times headline said it all. 30 seconds too late. Damn. So, all in all, I believe, was it 20 or 21 Molly Maguires end up being hanged? And just like that, they wiped out this entire Hibernian network. Several of those people probably, as they themselves confessed, probably did commit murders at some point for various reasons, but many of them did not. But as the folk song says, "I tell you boys, Alex Campbell is my name, and no pistol did I fire." But he has to fall from the gallows wall just for being a Molly Maguire. I forget which guy did it
Yeah,
All
it
these,
was,
but
it was 20. 20 was the number.
20.
Yeah.
And I forget which of these Mollies, the two different books say it was actually a different person, but it either was Alex Campbell or another guy declared at the Mock Chunk courthouse, I believe, that I don't know, he put his hand in something and then like slapped it on the wall as like a handprint. And he said that like this handprint would remain until like justice was, reversed and their like names were cleared or something like that. And as of the writing of this book in the 1940s, allegedly, if you go to the Mock Chunk jail, or I think it might now be called Jim Thorpe after a local famous athlete, but if you go to the courthouse there, at least until the mid 20th century, there was a handprint on the wall of one of the innocently charged Molly Maguires. And actually, if you go deeper into the 20th century, I believe in the 1970s, the descendants of Blackjack Kehoe were able to get the governor of Pennsylvania to like posthumously issue him a pardon for all of these convictions. So, as it stands today, legally speaking, Blackjack Kehoe did nothing wrong. He was innocent. Well, he was innocent, definitely of that Civil War thing, right?
Yeah.
And he should not have hanged. So this is really, this is the big performance of Gowen's life. And now that he's like vanquished the Molly Maguires and purged the bad Irish influence and taken control of all of the coal mining interests in Schuylkill County, you'd think this guy's finally got it made. This is his primitive accumulation moment to then launch himself into the level of, a Rockefeller, a Carnegie, etc. And I guess he does, throughout the rest of the last couple of years of this decade, he is still president of the Reading and he's making deals. This book, The Ruler of the Reading, kind of goes into like excruciating detail of his kind of movements with like the sort of cartel agreements that he has with the other coal operators. At this point, the union is crushed, like, so he doesn't have to worry about workers really, even with the blip of the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, that kind of settles down. And then he can go back to like making moves. But the thing is that the 1870s was still a period of depression, of deep economic depression in the country, right? And a lot of Gowen's moves, like his vision with all of this stuff of like buying out all the coal land and creating like a vertically integrated thing, is that when the economy comes back, this is going to absolutely boom in value. And so, he's courting a lot of capital from investors at various points. And he's buying up a lot of these lands on borrowed money. And he's getting more and more leveraged. I think particularly he goes to the McCalmonts, who are London, capitalists. He goes to Britain multiple times. And he raises a bunch of money from like British capitalists who want to invest in the railroad. Things are humming along, but they have a pretty heavy like debt burden by like 1877, 1878, and he's kind of distracted for like a year and a half because he's personally prosecuting all these Molly Maguires and like becoming a celebrity and all these other things. Kind of reminds you of another billionaire these days who gets a little distracted with like his public duties and being a big news item and kind of getting into politics. Gowen has a curious railroad venture in Brazil in 1877, which kind of like collapses in like fraud, and a sort of like eccentric guy like raises a bunch of money from people and then they like go to the Amazon, and I think they were trying to build like an intra Amazon like some sorcerer shit basically. Like, oh, let's just build like a train through like the Amazon, and then of course it cost like way more than they expected, and the guy kind of ran off with a bunch of money, etc. Then at this point also like a couple big rivals like come on Gowen's radar. One is like the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Pennsy, I guess people call it, that is kind of like buying out a lot of competitors and is like the most powerful rival to the Reading and to the others, etc. The other thing is like this new little company called Standard Oil, which is starting to drill for oil in Ohio, I believe. And they have some like strange kind of cartel agreements with like certain operators that like exclusively traffic their oil to markets, and then they charge everybody else like 4 times as much. And like Gowen ends up not being a big fan of Standard Oil and kind of resents like how they come into the game very hot. And also, it's not quite apparent yet, but oil, is going to eventually like supplant coal in the decades to come. But, they don't know that yet. But let's see. Also, I think, let's see. Oh, yeah, brink of disaster. So at this time, because of the Molly Maguire trial to a large degree and his like public persona, he's just as popular and well known as like a Vanderbilt or somebody like that. You know, like these huge like scions of business. He's very well known in the 1870s, and he's able to like, you can tell he's got that gift of gab, right? That he's able to use that to go and get money from people because like his golden tongue, he can always convince them. And it's like he believes what he's saying. So like they end up believing it. And like he's a great hustler, essentially, in getting people to loan him lots of money. As far as like, his accounting skills, maybe not so much. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of like lawfare going on, you know, about like regulations getting passed that'll hurt his rivals, and like he tanks, you know, he either sponsors it or tanks it. I think at one point he gets like called to Congress and called to the state Senate in Pennsylvania and like introduces his own version of the bill that like they're asking him like advice about, and they're like, wow, it's so good, and they just like take his bill and pass it. Which, you know, obviously probably had things that was good for him in it. But, like, he spent hours, you know, like, regaling everybody, and everyone just gets psyoped by him. So he gets involved in, like, a fierce, weird struggle involving, I guess, Titusville, Ohio. Yeah, where the first oil wells were, early oil wells were, you know, discovered. But then Standard Oil Company kind of, like, establishes tight control over transportation out of the petroleum country through rebate agreements with major railroads. Restless in the grip of the monopoly, the independent producers tried to find a new route to seaboard. So yeah, Standard Oil was kind of blocking like independent operators' ability to like sell oil to the East Coast or like export it, basically, through these rebate agreements. So they were able to discover an independent railway to take their oil to Buffalo, where it could reach New York over the Erie Canal, but this route was roundabout and unsatisfactory since the canal was closed in winter. So in their search for a better road, 3 Titusville men approached Gowen with a proposal to build a pipeline 110 miles over the mountains from Bradford to Williamsport, where it could connect with the Reading. So Gowen liked this idea of sharing in the oil trade, put up $250K, half the needed capital. This is in 1878. Yeah, Standard was like opposed to this because he was basically trying to fuck around and like break Standard's like distribution monopoly, right? And they did build a pipeline in 1879 that could move it like and ship it on trains relatively quickly. It says, to Gowen's apparent surprise, the Standard and its allies did not take kindly to this new form of transportation. The Standard tried to acquire control of the Tidewater. Rebuffed in this, it offered to buy all the petroleum carried by the new pipeline. When that failed, it began purchasing the independent refineries to deprive the Tidewater of a market. The railroad men started an even more vigorous war. A few of these guys, including William H. Vanderbilt of the New York Central, met in Saratoga in 1879 with Henry Flagler representing Standard Oil. Although Flagler argued for compromise, the trunk line heads insisted on crushing the Tidewater by slashing their rates. Freight charges between Bradford and Philadelphia fell from 85 cents a barrel down to 25 to 20 and even 15. So yeah, there's like all this warfare raging all around him, and Gowen attempted to sue for peace on the coal front. Unrestrained production. Remember, this is his big dream is like massively increase production and like the amount of coal you're selling, and then that's going to like lift all boats and like everyone will make money and it'll be like amazing. But the problem was like they were overproducing coal for what the market could bear during a depression, right?
Yeah.
So unrestrained production was turning at 26 million tons in 1879, 20% above the best previous year, but prices were tumbling as they had in 1877. Insisting that higher prices could be obtained, Gowen asked the other companies to join in raising them. When the Delaware and Hudson declared it could get no more for its coal, he offered to take all it could produce at $2.50 a ton. After absorbing the Hudson surplus at a loss for 3 months, he abandoned the effort, whereupon the D&H began shipping its coal to Philly on its own account to compete in the Reading's market. In October, therefore, Gowen accepted the suggestion of Judge Francis Lathrop, receiver for the Jersey Central, that a new coal combination be discussed. Yeah, but then like this agreement kind of collapsed. Then in 1880, he took his petroleum battle to the halls of Congress, where he appeared at a hearing held by the House's Commerce Committee on a bill to prohibit discriminatory freight rates, which he was like infamous for, right? Attacking the Standard and the Pennsylvania Railroad, he reviewed the history of the Tidewater Pipeline for the congressman. Although he defended discrimination between places as a necessity of competition, he bitterly denounced discrimination between persons, such as the agreement under which the Standard got a rebate not only on its own oil, but also on the oil shipped by its competitors. Instead of the proposed commission to prevent discrimination, however, he suggested that prompter relief could be obtained if the federal courts were empowered to issue writs of mandamus. How do you say that? Mandamus? That's a legal term. mandamus. Anyways, compelling common carriers to transport goods at non-discriminatory rates. Redress in Pennsylvania, he said, was impossible because of the political influence.
You mean mandamus?
Mandamus? I guess it would be mandamus.
So.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I don't know if that's how people pronounce it, but yeah, I didn't.
Seems about right. Mandamus. Mandamus. Yeah. He said that redress in Pennsylvania was impossible because of the political influence of the large corporations. He conveyed the idea that even the state Supreme Court was dominated by the Pennsylvania Railroad. Interesting. Oh yeah, this is funny. Yeah, he does more like psyoping. He delivered another glancing blow at the Pennsylvania by going to Harrisburg in March to take part in the bribery trials resulting from the Railroad Riot Act's investigation. The first case to come up was that of Emil J. Petroff, a Philadelphia assemblyman who had been made the scapegoat of another bribery expose 5 years earlier and expelled from the legislature as a result. Quote, Colonel Gowen, as the local reporter called him, naturally assumed the leading role in the trial. Before the first juror was ever drawn, he had argued the presiding judge into reversing himself. He made the concluding address to the jury, a moving and flowery appeal for punishment of, quote, a crime that has destroyed the grandeur and glory of this commonwealth, and which has made this state in which I was born and hope to die a byword in the other states of the Union. This plea received considerable applause, and a member of the jury said later they had been agreed on Petroff's guilt before they left the box. Wow. So they all got convicted, and then they understood they would be pardoned immediately. I guess the other defendants pleaded guilty, seeing no chance to escape conviction. They understood they would be pardoned immediately, but Gowen and his fellow counsel surprised them by deciding to object to a commutation. Horrified at the prospect of going to jail, the frightened defendants disappeared for a week before they could get up enough courage to return to court for sentence. Wow. Kemble, the chief lobbyist, lingered in Atlantic City for still another week until he was informed that detectives were being sent after him. He left just in time to reach the railroad station in Philadelphia before the detectives arrived. Ignoring their attempt to arrest him, he insisted that he was going to Harrisburg to surrender voluntarily. At the state capitol, one of the officers tried to take him to the county jail, but he was warned by a state senator to treat Kemble with proper courtesy. For a moment, it appeared the banker might have to undergo the indignity of a night in prison, since no judge could be found to admit him to bail. But a deputy sheriff released him until the court met next morning. To make the pardoning of the 5 men politically practicable, the judge gave them such a severe sentence that public opinion swung around to their side. The Pardons Board at once remitted their 1-year jail term, although they were required to pay a $1,000 fine. Wow, that's funny. That guy just cannot handle you need to fix this. You need to fix this. I can't go to jail for 1 year. I'm just gonna have a meltdown. Wow, he just had enough of a tantrum that they're just like, oh okay,
it worked.
Wow. They over sentenced them to make it to swing public opinion. That's some clever shit. So yeah, I guess so. There was a little dust up and rivalry with early Standard Oil, and then after that, Andrew Carnegie was, and kind of the Pittsburgh capitalists were urging Gowen to build a new railroad between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, which could possibly connect to the Reading. And he says a railroad empire even vaster than Gowen's anthracite kingdom seemed to loom just beyond the horizon. But, unfortunately, in this next chapter, Brink of Disaster, these years of economic warfare had strained the Reading's shaky financial structure to the point of collapse. In the prosperous period from 1871 to 74, Gowen had borrowed at the rate of $16 million a year in order to buy up coal lands and pay for their development. While he realized that many of these properties could not be made productive for decades, he felt it was necessary to acquire them to protect the railroad's tonnage. Moreover, his unbounded faith in an expanding America made him confident that increased business would provide the profits to meet all interest charges. So yeah, he's borrowing a shitload of money this whole time. Eventually, I believe the former Smith, the former president who stepped down and appointed Gowen, he gets a look basically at the Reading's books at one point, and he's kind of shocked. Yeah, he's still on the board of managers. The stock begins to sag. I think he was unable to pay. Yeah, he stopped paying dividends in July 1876. So in the middle of the Molly thing, he has some slick reason for why that is. So the stockholders have no reason for being alarmed, and it's all totally normal. Then let me see. Yes, he keeps trying to get money out of the McCalmonts in Britain to just keep putting more money, but eventually they kind of like cut him off. They decided they wasted enough money and decide that they're not going to like keep, and I think there are rumors that like they cut off the dividends. And here's what he was like, to keep the stock going up. Gowen kept borrowing more money from the McCalmonts to basically do like stock buybacks, like to inflate the price of the stock by just like taking borrowed money and then buying Reading stock, which like made it appear that like the stock was doing really well. But then he goes back, and this works for a while, but then at a certain point, like he's borrowed a lot more money. He goes back to the McCalmonts and he cables them for another $500,000 to pump into the stock market. And they decide like, no, like we're actually done. And like, we're not going to send you any more money. So then at that point, he has to stop buying the stock, and it drove 12 points in 2 hours, and then like starts plummeting basically like after that. And then there were, bearish speculators encouraged the fall by circulating rumors that the Reading would not be able to meet its next interest payments, and company funds had been wasted in an attempt to support the stock, and that Gowen would be forced out. In early November, a report that the Reading had a floating debt of $3 million reached the ears of ex-President Smith. Hastening to the company offices, he demanded to know if this were true. Gowen blandly replied that the floating debt was actually $7 million. Smith was startled, since he had never heard the matter mentioned at board meetings. At home, he pored over the annual reports without finding a hint that the Reading had a floating debt. Returning to Gowen, he asked that a special meeting of the board be called. When the directors met, Smith demanded that a committee be appointed to investigate the books. Gowen, with the strong support of Adolph Bory, once Ulysses Grant's Secretary of the Navy, refused to allow the resolution to go on the minutes, but told Smith to examine the records for himself, even offering the use of his own office. By now, the ex-president was ready to suspect the worst. Going over the unpublished accounts of the Coal and Iron Company, he discovered practices which seemed to smack of dishonesty. At the end of the railroad's fiscal year, in November of 1873 and 74, he found the floating debt had been transferred to the books of the Coal and Iron Company, thus keeping it out of the railroad's annual reports. Then it had been shifted back to the railroad when the Coal and Iron accounts were closed for the year in December. Moreover, according to Smith's calculations, the Coal and Iron Company had lost $15 million during the preceding 5 years. The net earnings of the two companies, therefore, had been less than $3 million for the period, instead of the $18 million given in the annual reports. To Gowen, these matters seemed only a question of bookkeeping methods. Damn. Yeah, that's wild, bro. Yeah, Smith had arrived at his figures by charging both interest and improvements as operating expenses, while Gowen felt that these were justifiable charges against capital. And he said that the transfer of floating debt between the two companies, as he later explained, was merely a bookkeeping procedure. So, like, no big deal. But, he doesn't appreciate that Smith is like, they eventually get in like a big public fight, and he like insults him in public and is like, actually, I don't know why you hate me, bro, like personally, but like, fuck you. You're jealous of my success, like, etc. So they had, Gowen, I guess partly due to Smith like calling him out, he did resign as a manager on the board after this. So yeah, Smith's criticism goes nowhere. But Gowen submits in 1876 the frankest annual report he'd ever made. Figures were even given for the Coal and Iron Company for the first time. The bald facts were alarming. The funded debt of the railroad company now totaled $65 million, including $55 million in mortgage bonds and $10 million in junior securities. Annual interest charges on these obligations were $4 million, not to mention sinking fund requirements of $500,000. Besides, there were $15 million in coal and iron bonds in the hands of the public, which required interest of $1 million a year. To meet these $5.5 million in fixed charges, the railroad company had earned a little more than $3 million in 1876, while the Coal and Iron Company had an operating loss of over $600,000, causing a $3 million deficit for the year. Somehow, this had swallowed up the $10 million borrowed in January. Gowen had found it necessary to create a floating debt of $8 million more, thus raising the interest requirements by another $500,000. In spite of the fact that the two companies had never in their entire history come close to earning enough to pay the interest on this debt, Gowen's optimistic computations still managed to produce a convincing prophecy that dividends could soon be resumed. The troubles in 1876, he explained, had all been due to the coal combination. The restrictions imposed by the association had seriously impaired the railroad's revenues, and blah, blah, blah. So he had a bunch of excuses for why it's like all about to get better. Just trust me, bro. Like, it's totally cool. But he starts doing like cost cutting measures all over like the company. Like, I guess the railroad even stopped wiping the dirt off of its train engines and stuff like that. Yeah. Anything that was like not like critically essential. Remember Gustavus Myers talked about these railroads kind of like falling into like, you know, being unsafe and like falling into disrepair and stuff. This is like one reason why like a railroad would just start to like completely suck, is because like they totally overborrowed and got caught in this like weird shell game. And now he also stopped like paying his employees for like a while and issued them like promissory notes at like a small thing of like interest, basically, and was like, oh, this is amazing. Everybody loves it. Everyone loves not being paid in cash. Then, he goes up to England and he gives like a great performance. And like basically he was introduced to the British capitalists as the man who had broken up the Molly Maguires amidst cries of "Here, here."
Wow. I
These
bet,
Orangemen love it. They love it. Maybe that's another benefit of destroying the Molly Maguires. All the English capitalists like love him, you know? And he basically says like, okay, like we're deeply in debt and it's all fucked up, but like all the moves I made, I had to do what we did. We would have been crushed by now if it wasn't for all these moves. Like all these competitors would have taken us, and like everything I did, I had to do. And like generally, like people, like some people start heckling him, but like mostly, he kind of parries it, and then people are like, okay, like you're on the road to success. It's fine. But things just keep piling up and like getting a little more dicey. Then there is the Black Friday of 1880. I think it's on page 199 here. He links up with William H. Vanderbilt in a big way, who I think buys some of the Reading, buys a significant share of like Reading stock, and they're kind of collaborating on a sort of defunct railroad project in Pennsylvania, who I believe he's the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the original patriarch. So there was more financial difficulties, 1879. He's yelling at journalists, like, because he goes to Europe and people are thinking, he's going to go there and get a bunch of money. But then he comes back and doesn't say anything. And then journalists go to his house. And he comes to the door, his face livid with rage, and blurts out, "Such impertinence on the part of newspapers would not be tolerated in any other country on the face of the globe but this." And the reporters ran away. The stock was still sagging. Yeah, the stock was sagging. He was kind of facing off against the Scranton companies, who are kind of competing against him. Yet they lost more money in 1879 than they did in 1878. They failed to meet their fixed charges by $2.75 million. Wages had been paid in scrip throughout the year, but more than half the outstanding certificates had been redeemed. Gowen's promise to reduce the floating debt by $1.75 million each year had now been entirely forgotten. He no longer preserved the fiction of separating the wage certificates from the floating debt in order to keep the latter figure down. Instead, he unabashedly conceded the floating debt had soared $2.5 million in 1879, passing $9 million. Part of this increase had been due to building the necessary connections to make the North Penn lease satisfactory. So let's see. He has new reasons that are everyone else is manipulating the market except for him. This is what happens. So undaunted by the increase in his bank loans and by the prospective end of the 3-year moratorium on half the general mortgage interest, Gowen looked to 1880 with confidence. On the last day of 1879, he surprised his employees by paying them in cash, the first time in 16 months. The railroad workers, now also under the sliding scale, received an increase of 10% over October. He told his employees, "While congratulating you upon the advent of a year which is undoubtedly to be one of great prosperity, the managers desire to thank you all most sincerely for the fidelity you have shown to the interests of the company during the long period of depression through which it has safely passed." The informal agreements among anthracite companies to limit production by restricting the number of days worked was keeping prices at satisfactory levels, and the miners were paid on the basis in April, the first time in 5 years. The increased demand permitted a fairly high production, although a slackening off of the iron trade in the spring kept production from rising as much as expected. The stock closed at 35 on April 1st, the highest level since 1876. All the company had to do was to get by the first lean months of the year, and profits would start paying off all the debts. Gowen kept his funds on a hand-to-mouth basis, paying his bills with checks which were made good by later deposits. The New York correspondent of the Philadelphia Press was startled when a railroad president showed him in confidence a note, quote, "Will you kindly hold over the check which I gave you for $25,000 until Monday and oblige? Yours very truly, Franklin B. Gowen." That's not a good sign, really. Don't cash this check yet. On Wednesday and Thursday, May 20th, 21st, Gowen drew checks on the Coal and Iron Company for $300,000 and deposited them to the credit of the railroad company. This time, unfortunately, the checks came back on Friday marked not sufficient funds. Gowen promptly offered the railroad's notes to make them good, but the bank refused to accept them. A plea by cable to the McCalmonts for the loan of another $500,000 was rejected, and only one course was left open. The formal announcement was issued. Quote, the Philadelphia and Reading Company and the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company have been compelled to suspend payment. The managers will take immediate measures to protect intact the property of both companies and continue their business. There had been no such excitement in Philadelphia since the memorable day in September 1873 when J. Cook and Company had closed its doors and carried the nation down into 6 years of depression. That day, in fact, had been a mild one, according to at least one observer, compared to Gowen's Black Friday. Philadelphians were stunned by the news. In Pottsville, an incredulous crowd stared as the quickly posted bulletin. Excited investors dumped their holdings in a wild flurry of selling, which sent the stock down from 23 to 12.5 in an hour. The hastily assembled board of managers gathered in Gowen's office to decide what to do. Clerks ran back and forth with huge ledgers under their arms, while superintendents holding long statements in their hands hurried in to see Gowen. Reporters tried to interview the scurrying officials, but none of them would talk. One journalist attempted to trap the president as he was leaving. Quote, young man, I am not to be caught this way, answered Gowen, clapping on his silk top hat with a hearty laugh. The most correspondence could get was an anonymous statement the company would resume payments in 30 days without going through bankruptcy. Outsiders were more willing to comment. Ex-President Smith was triumphant at the fulfillment of his gloomy predictions. For 2 years, he declared, he'd been sure the Reading would crash. He said, this company, he said, has no future but bankruptcy, and it must get rid of Mr. Gowen, or bankruptcy won't help it. Should he be made receiver, it'll be the same old story. No, wow. So, yeah, the Reading just spirals into crisis, and this is like the first time it starts defaulting on its payments, and basically they have to enter into, like, file bankruptcy and go into receivership. Though Gowen is appointed one of the receivers, but I think after that, he does get to stay president for a little while, partially because he convinces William H. Vanderbilt to like vote for him at the next shareholder meeting, and he comes out on top basically to hold on to it, but not like for super long. So he starts to fight against the Pennsy, and he starts to fight with Jay Gould over the Jersey Central Railroad as well. Meanwhile, the British McCalmonts like start trashing Gowen in the press and saying that like he sucks. He starts borrowing from mysterious like French capitalists that probably don't exist. There is a brief period where he like gets out, and then his like longtime aide George de Bonneville Kyme takes over. But then like to Gowen's shock, Kyme kind of like boxes him out, and the management and the board of the railroad kind of like turn their back on him, and he's super pissed off about this. Like he gets really mad about it and is like, I thought I was supposed to like rule from the shadows.
Yeah.
But then it kind of like spills into a very messy public fight. Yeah, that's a end of a friendship in chapter 18. That's right. They do forcibly throw him out, but he like challenges it and is like, I don't agree. Like that you can I don't agree that I can be thrown out as president. At one point he gives like a final like TED Talk speech. Basically, he gives like an insane 4-hour speech, like where they're trying to get him out of the company against this guy Bond, who's kind of floated up as like a replacement. He held his postponed meeting of the Reading stockholders in the Academy of Music on April 23rd. A large crowd packed in the orchestra, the parquet circle, and 2 galleries, overflowing into the aisles, the steps, and the lobbies. Many from out of town had come in on special trains provided by Gowen. A friendly reporter thought the audience consisted largely of the solid businessmen of the community, men of affairs, of brains, of foresight, of success. Even ex-Governor Hartranft, forgetting his anger at the Molly Maguire pardon charges, had a private box. Full of self-confidence, which verged on arrogance, Gowen entertained his listeners with a long and witty diatribe against all his enemies. C.E. Smith had entreated him to sacrifice his career as a lawyer and take over the presidency of the company in order to save the retiring president from the asylum. The cowardly McCalmonts had refused to put up a second $500,000 to protect the stock of the company when he was relying on them, and they had again refused $500,000 to save the company from bankruptcy. The opposition had imported a London stockbroker to attack the integrity of the late Adolph E. Borey, a man whose honor was as unsullied as the chastity of a vestal. Harris had resorted to an algebraic equation to destroy the value of the coal property, with the result that the estimated land covered with timber at $5 an acre, more than the land that had both timber and coal. The Anglo-American bankers had opposed this reorganization plan because he had denied them the commission on his deferred bonds. Hugh McElmont had tricked him into remaining in England until it was too late for him to return for the annual meeting, as he denounced the cowardly meanness of such a dastardly act as that. The reporter noted, quote, applause, renewed applause, great applause, and long continued applause.
Nice.
He satirized the opera bouffe performance of Bond and his would-be board of managers. His 6 directors must be the influential stockholders who had opposed his election, although they had bought their shares since December. There were 2 classes, the sanguine, who would each purchase 50 shares, and the cautious, who had bought only 25. While the audience was still laughing, he showed the insignificance of the opposition's votes. Outside the McElmont holdings, they had been able to pull only 25,000 English shares and only 5,000 in America. A mere 74 American shareholders had voted against the existing management. Yeah, he gets whipped up on this shit. And then he also kind of like throws in there the whole crusade, he says, against the Reading had been gotten up to place the company under the control of the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Pennsylvania was trying to induce the Reading to abandon its right to bring Western products to Philadelphia in return for the Penzies anthracite business. The Reading had always helped Philadelphia, while the Pennsylvania, quote, had done more to destroy this city in business and in morals than an army of the locusts in Egypt. The Pennsylvania had grabbed the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore to keep the Baltimore and Ohio out of the city. If it also gobbled up the Reading, nobody in Philadelphia would be able to do any business whatever without first making obeisance to the Pennsylvania Railroad. He revealed that his detectives had brought him reports of the Pennsylvania's attempt to bribe the legislature in 1879, and he charged it with controlling the city council of Philadelphia. This battle against monopoly and corruption struck a popular note. The audience renewed its applause as he ended after 3 hours. The reactions of the Pennsylvania railroad officials was less favorable. Colonel Tom Scott said Gowen, quote, had placed himself beyond the pale of official recognition, and President George Roberts said his remarks were so unbecoming that I do not desire to offer any comment. Even his friends cautioned him against indulging in such excessive abuse. Wow. The public enjoyed his attack on the Pennsylvania and asked for more. I guess, yeah, then he goes to the Academy of Music again, where there are gigantic railway maps displayed on stage to illustrate the talk. He brought out, at the beginning, he brings out General Robert Patterson, Philadelphia's venerable hero of 3 wars, only a few months from his grave, who was greeted with applause. The old veteran said there is no need to introduce of Gowen. This is a man who is known in every city and state in the Union, whose courage redeemed the Schuylkill region from a set of robbers and pirates and murderers, the only man in this state who had the nerve, the ability, and perseverance to do it. The audience burst into applause again, which grew thunderous as Gowen stepped on stage. One eyewitness wrote, like a charger pawing impatiently for the fray, the orator stood in evident consciousness of power, and darting his keen glance over the audience as he paled and flushed by turns, he waited for silence. When the applause died down, he donned his shining armor and launched his attack on the dragon, which was holding the fair city of Philadelphia in chains. If Philadelphia, he said, had collected and distributed the wealth of Pennsylvania, it would have been the first city of America. 50 years before, the city had projected the Pennsylvania to reach the west, the Sunbury and Erie to connect with the Great Lakes, and the Reading in the North Pennsylvania to reach the anthracite region. These plans, however, had failed to bring the state's commerce to Philadelphia. While the Reading had been trying to develop the state and bring its commerce to its chief city, the Pennsylvania had been building up western lines and injuring those inside the state. So yeah, it goes on another 3.5 hour thing. Yeah, he also says kind of presciently, there was still a more important issue to be discussed, however, one which affected the honor and integrity of the entire nation. There was an uneasy feeling of dread and apprehension in the minds of the people over the evils committed by the railroads. Unless it were allayed, this feeling might lead to revolution. There were 3 great wrongs of corporation management: unjust acquisition of wealth by railway officials, unjust discrimination in favor of particular individuals or companies, and corrupt control of political power. Each of these injustices were exemplified in the Pennsylvania Railroad. Then, calling on his listeners to follow him on a noble crusade, he concluded, I cannot but believe that you will do your part to place your great city in the position she should occupy towards a system which permits such wrongs to go unrebuked. Those who suffer from the injury can apply the remedy, and I can only conclude by expressing the hope that the irresistible fiat of a great people will be heard and obeyed, so that vice may be defeated and virtue may be triumphant, and so that a man shall say verily, there is a reward for the righteous. Doubtless there is a God that judges the earth. Doubtless there's a job. Anyways.
Well, doubtless there is, because before we conclude, we should talk about what eventually happened to Franklin Gowen in 1889.
The final author of him getting bumped out after kind of like leaving, coming back a few times, is he comes back, and then a young whippersnapper from New York named J.P. Morgan forms a syndicate to basically like take over like the railroad interests in Pennsylvania and reorganize them. And this syndicate looks at Franklin Gowen and is like basically like, fuck this guy. Like, no, like we're not like doing this, you know, like he has to go. I think, let me just read, because then we'll get to what actually happened, like the final act of what happens. But to explain why he was down on his luck, the iron hand of J. Pierpont Morgan descended on the Reading and got together a syndicate, and an anonymous member of the syndicate made clear what was meant by bringing peace and prosperity to the Reading, which was still deeply in debt and struggling. This person said, "In order to do this, it has been found necessary to get rid of Mr. Gowen. We have all combined to get him out of railroad management, just as all the powers of Europe combined to crush Napoleon, and there will be no peace until Mr. Gowen is in St. Helena. He is an able and brilliant man, and in some respects a veritable Napoleon, but he is no railroad manager. The trouble with Mr. Gowen is that he wants to be fighting all the time. When he was after the Molly Maguires, he was in his element, but as a railroad manager, he is a failure." Damn. So he gets forced out and bought out by like J.P. Morgan on the rise, basically, and put out to pasture. And, you know, around the age of 50 is just a guy, just a lawyer now with no connection, really, like only a nominal connection to the Reading Railroad. I think after one final push to like save the company because it's collapsing, and then he comes back and is like, "See, you guys fired me, and now it's failing, and like I'm the only one who can save it," and blah blah blah. And then right after that, J.P. Morgan swoops in and is like, "No, we're in a new era, punk. Like, and you're not a railroad manager." In a way, he wasn't. So he ends up going down to Washington, D.C. to do some like work. He actually does some testifying about Standard Oil being a sus monopoly in 1888. And then he's hired by some congressional committee to investigate something else. So he's down in D.C. staying at Wormley's Hotel. And then on December 13th, 1889, Friday the 13th, we should add, he goes to a store and he buys a Volver, you know, as the Mollies would say. He buys a pearl-handled revolver and goes back to his hotel room and I guess like stands in front of the mirror, and I think as this one book says, like ironically,
this is like line.
Commits the like classic Molly Maguire act of killing a mine boss himself.
Yeah,
and he shoots himself.
Yes.
Yeah. So he KMS's, like he shoots himself in this hotel room on Friday the 13th, 1889.
Yeah, and a morbid imitation of his old enemies.
Right.
Yeah, killed a mine
kills a mine boss himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, you know, and even, you know, old Captain Linden from the Coal and Iron Police, like initially rushes down to D.C. and apparently like his first thought is that a Molly Maguire caught up with him finally and did him in, right? Yeah. But then as they kind of like start interviewing people and everything, it becomes kind of apparent that Gowen has been kind of like spiraling for a while and getting more depressed and like morose about everything. And, you know, he has the witness, like the store owner, that like he came in there and he bought a gun and he's like, "Oh, sorry, like the bullet box for this, like the box is kind of damaged." And he's like, "It doesn't matter." You know, like classic, the suicide indicating going on. And, you know, I mean, he was by no means like totally financially ruined or anything like that. But his quest to like rise to the top of the business, like the Mount Olympus of like American capitalism, was he got kicked out of that like insider top dog club of like the real. So, and he got basically, like the independent operators that he bought out, he himself was replaced by an even bigger operator, the biggest big boy of them all, J.P. Morgan, and outmaneuvered by like the Rockefellers, the people that would go on to have their names on everything. And so ironically, despite his celebrity during this era and all his success in getting the Mollies hanged and everything, he's virtually like unknown. Even in histories of the Mollies, like his name is often misspelled, or they say Francis Gowen or something like that. You know, like he even in the movie, the Molly Maguire movie, he's like, which in the 60s,
really?
he's not. I think there's one mention of his name or something like, but he's not like. You talk about a missed opportunity. Like they do like a 15-minute court sequence at the end of it, and it's like, but there's no like evil railroad guy, that is this character. Like he's could just fallen into total obscurity, but it's a certain type of American. It's an interesting American story. I'll say that much about him.
Yes.
Like kind of ahead of his time in a way of being like a meme lord, a talker. And something a little Irish American about it.
Yeah, we can only hope that some of the people that we are doing with today will fall into the same obscurity eventually.
I certainly hope so. And we didn't get to talk about it as much, but it's just worth mentioning in terms of like other descendants of the Molly Maguires. The Sons of Molly Maguire book has an interesting postscript at the end about how two labor leaders in like Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, in the mid and late 20th century, in the New Deal era, were direct descendants of charged, I think in at least one case, like executed Molly Maguires. There's a whole interesting thing with them. One of them was arrested. He was a big Teamster leader, and he was arrested with like a stockpile of like guns and like military uniforms and shit in 2000, and was accused of like plotting to disrupt the Republican National Convention in Philadelphia in 2000, and also was like a huge sponsor of the IRA, and like funded and like funneling arms to them. So
it was John Morris,
right?
Who you're talking about. Yeah.
There's an article, the last of the Molly Maguires, or something in like New Time or Newsweek in 2000. So you could see in certain militancies of the labor struggles of like Teamsters era and shit, like there is actually a direct lineage of literally some Mollies. John McCullough is the other one. Yeah, that was going up well into the 90s. Morris is from Mahanoy City, and they were descendants. Vice president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters was John Morris, yeah. So anyways, that might be interesting to look back on one day of like Irish Americans like supporting the IRA and doing things like that. But yeah, I think that's about it. That's about it for the Molly Maguire saga. When the wind blows wild at night, in the breaker, melancholy, if you stand in the dark with your ear to the wind, you will hear the sons of Molly.
All right.
And with that,
dear
listeners, until next time, stay vigilant.
Peace.
When the wind blows wild at night, past the breaker melancholy, if you stand in the dark with your ear to the wind, you can hear the sons of Molly. Deep in the dark of the old mine shaft, you can smell the smoke and fire, and the whispers low in the mines below is the ghost of Molly Maguire. Now I'll tell you boys, Mickey Doyle is my name, and I come from Carbon County, and I shot the boss of the Hansford mine, and my soul is up for bounty. But I will die with my head held high, for I fought for the men below, the men who slave and sweat and die down in the black hell. Now I'll tell you boys, Edward Kelly is my name, and I'm hanging in the morning. For I shot Jack Jones for skin in my bone, and I curse the sound of morning. But I will die with my head held high, for I fought for the men below, the men who slave and sweat and die down in the black elbow. Now I'll tell you boys, Alex Campbell is my name, and no pistol did I fire. But I will fall from the gallows wall just for being a Molly Maguire. But I will die with my head held high, I fought for the men below, the men who slave and sweat and died down in that black hellhole. When the wind blows wild at night, as the breaker melancholy, if you stand in the dark with your ear to the wind, you can hear the sons of Molly. Deep in the dark of the old mine shaft, you can smell the smoke